As always, we begin with our Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, we have a very full agenda tonight, primarily because of our big presentation that we will be hearing from shortly. Can I have a motion to accept our agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I also should mention that Bob Grados is actually quite sick tonight. He has the flu. So he is missing an important meeting, but when you're ill, you're ill.
Yeah, I'm happy he didn't show up with the flu.
Yeah. So we'll begin with our superintendent's report, as always. Chris, please take it away.
So, good evening, everyone. A few important items to report on before we get into the meat of our presentations this evening. As we've been providing updates along the way, we're in the process of seeking to try to possibly find someone to fill Bev's shoes, even though we know that's not possible. We had the good pleasure of hosting our committee round of interviews today, which I want to thank a number of my colleagues and community members that participated, including Mr. McClure, who's in the audience this evening. Thank you. And Mr. Whitney, who served as a Board of Education representative. We interviewed a number of fine candidates today, and we're quite pleased with how the interviews went, and we look forward to bringing a few more candidates onto the next round. And also I want to thank Mr. Sotile, of course, for participating in those interviews, and Dr. Kaur for facilitating a great process for us. And, I'm sorry? Oh, and Allison Wagasback walked in. Who on the committee isn't here? Raise your hand. Yeah. But thank you. It was really a great group, and we look forward to identifying some finalists to introduce to the board in not too distant future. We also want to acknowledge that we have two students that have moved on to become National Merit finalists this year, Zach Gallen and Sweta Narajan. They're now eligible for the final round to see if they're able to receive any scholarships, and we look forward to celebrating their achievement at a future Board of Education meeting. Also this weekend we'll host the final two shows of Shrek the Musical. Not only will the show highlight the impressive talents of our students, but it will mark the end of a 35-show run for our outstanding director, Diana Selenow, who's just been an amazing inspiration for our students for so many years. We look forward to honoring Diana and her work at Saturday night's presentation, and certainly encourage anyone who has not seen the show yet to come on out and catch our students and Diana Friday and Saturday night. There are still a few seats left, but I hear they are going fast. I'd also like to acknowledge our Destination Imagination teams from Main Street School. We have 8 teams, 4 teams from 4th grade, 4 teams from 5th grade that competed in the Eastern Regional Tournament at Mercy College on Saturday. And we had 2 teams that scored highest in their respective challenges, and we had the 5th grade team, the fantastic Fiolians, and you can guess who their teacher advisor is with the name Fiolians. And the 4th grade team, the Imaginators. Because they won their individual categories, they are moving on to the state level competition on April 9th at SUNY Broome College. So we wish them the best of luck, and who knows, maybe they'll be moving on to nationals down in Nashville later in the year. So we look forward, Ms. Chapnick, to hearing good reports on their success on April 9th. And of course, we need to thank the IEF for funding this great initiative and making it possible, and to our volunteer teachers and team managers who really are working closely with our students to help them take all their creativity and innovative ideas to the next level. So congratulations to them, and we look forward to acknowledging them at a future meeting as well. This year has just been loaded with so much student accomplishment. It's quite impressive. Dr. Kaur, a few things on the curriculum front?
You forgot the GOB tomorrow.
GOB tomorrow, Main Street School, what time?
10 a.m.
10 a.m. Be there. Find your way there on your own. So, Raina?
Sure. Just in last week, seems like a month ago, we had an early release day for continued work around the development of our units of study. So throughout the district, that was an early release day. For those last 2 hours, teachers continued to work on developing their units. Next week, we're excited to host at Dow's Lane. We will be hosting 35 curriculum leaders from the region as they come to visit PLTW launch at the elementary school. There is a lot of interest in Project Lead the Way around this region, and we have had many people ask to come and visit, and we have held them at bay for the most part. But next week, we will invite them in. Joyce will be there with some students from Main Street School, some fourth graders who will be sharing their work and what they've learned, and Gwen Carney will be in her classroom, and our visitors will be able to see Project Lead the Way in action. Meg and Deb will be talking about both the joys and challenges of organizing and getting Project Lead the Way up and running. And Jesse and I will be talking about it from a district point of view in terms of both the financial support that it requires, the amazing support that we got from PTSA that allowed this to happen for us, as well as future and next steps, and in this case, some of those challenges in terms of how do you continue to build a program. So we are very excited about that.
Thank you. Good, thank you. Before we
Wait, I'm sorry. April 7th, April 7th is our PLTW showcase. We invite parents, we invite the whole community to come in and learn about Project Lead the Way. We'll be here in the campus library. A flyer went out. Don't worry, we'll send it 10 more times at least. And we will have teachers from K through 3 through 12 showcasing Project Lead the Way work as well as students. So that'll be April 7th.
That's in the evening.
And that'll be in the evening.
Thank you very much. Great reports from our administration. Before we move to our featured presentation, I just want to confirm that we don't have any parents or children coming here to speak about the opt-out testing. Nope, nobody's here? Okay, fine. We'll move on to the budget presentation from Dr. Harrison and Ms. Miller.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is, as you can see, our third installment in a long series of very important discussions. We started back on January 12th with a roundtable with the board and administration where we highlighted current initiatives and future needs in our schools. And some of that dialogue has really begun to inform the conversations that we've been having through this process. On February 9th, we kind of took a step back and approached this from a bit of a different angle and taking a look at where we were with the budget, recognizing that we knew we were going to be facing some challenges and challenges that we will revisit again tonight, but really begin to focus on the struggles that we're having in the district and primarily as a result of a failed tax levy cap model and poor state funding. At the last board meeting 2 weeks ago, we highlighted the business and operational side of the district, looking at what our needs are. And tonight we move our attention to curriculum, technology, athletics, special ed, PPBS, and employee benefits. So through this entire process, we always set forth with a number of important objectives. And in doing so, we tried to balance the needs of the entire school community. Wherever possible, we want to try to expand and enrich student experiences, and whether that's through new courses, new club activities, co-curricular experiences. But we know we need to do so with a focus on curriculum, professional development, and of course, we always have to maintain our facilities. So in doing so, we have to keep in mind those programs that we value, those things that are important to us, those things that are important to our students, and those additional services that I've highlighted here. Whether it's the extracurricular, whether it's basic levels of support that we provide our kids or enriching programs, and those key personnel that are so important in our buses and in our classrooms and across the district. Through this process, we try to keep our mind and our eye on this and try to make sure we're making wise, informed decisions. So, as I referenced before, we have challenges, challenges that we outlined earlier. We have a tax levy cap that doesn't seem to be working for anybody across the state. It's known as a 2% tax levy cap, and I can tell you it's anything but a 2% increase. As we highlighted in previous presentations, we're actually seeing a negative increase, a negative 0.07% increase in our tax levy, which means that the district is allowed to raise taxes to a level that is $37,000 lower than the current year. It doesn't seem to make sense. We know that costs increase, whether that's employee costs, whether that's operational costs, simple utility expenses, they all increase. But unfortunately, because of the financial conditions across the nation and locally, we're facing a situation where there is nearly no inflation, and those levels are certainly driving where we are. We're looking at situations where there's challenges now, where state aid is not being increased at levels that we need to see to meet the expenses that all school districts are facing across the country, to look at the unfunded or underfunded mandates that we face that are coming down from the federal government or from the state, and we certainly can't make all of those needs. Of course, there's always that type of wrangling and fighting that happens up in Albany, and we're waiting to see where that goes. And one of those areas is looking at GEA. We have our Senate that's been calling for restoration of GEA. The governor's only committed to a partial restoration. We need our money, and we need our money now. It would be helpful with the consideration of all the challenges that we are facing this year. But right now, they're still holding back more funds that should come to Irvington. Since 2009, the state has withheld $2.5 million in aid to Irvington. And it's time that we start to see that money. And hopefully, before the budget is finalized up in Albany, we will see some increases there, maybe see some additional increases in other state aids. But we hold our breath, and we have to wait and see, and we have to plan without knowing what those final figures look like. But all said and done, we know that it's not a blank check. We know we have to maintain a responsible tax rate, keeping a mind's eye to the pocketbooks and purse strings of all those folks in the community. But in doing so, we have challenges. We have pension obligations we have to meet. We have benefits that we have to pay for and salaries that we have to pay. And some of the unknown factors that we've talked about along the way is that we're in negotiations with 3 of our 4 bargaining groups. So we have a kind of a question mark as to where we go there and recognize the challenges that we see. And I'll reference that throughout the presentation. And of course, our debt service obligations and all of the mandates that we have to fulfill. So tonight in this presentation, we're going to give some overview in the variances from our proposals that you'll see to last year, so you can see some of those changes. It's going to be itemized category by category. There's going to be supporting information that's going to be available, information that's going to be posted on the website to help you understand, and know that you can always reach out to us, email budget@irvingtonschools.org, and we will be glad to answer any questions. But we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty at the next meeting after we get some direction from the board tonight. The next meeting will be March 22nd, and that's when I'll present the proposed district budget. And at that time, you'll see where the tax cap is falling out, hopefully a little more information from Albany. But if not, we will have our estimates on tax rate and overall taxation impact for our community. So tonight, as I said before, our focus is going to be on curriculum instruction, technology, PPS and special ed, athletics, and employee benefits. As we go through this, you'll see there's kind of a common theme and pattern that we followed through the presentations, but know that all these budget categories have common expenses that are integrated into it. And that's looking at personnel, instructional or otherwise, looking at curriculum materials, professional development as related, and other services that are related to support the programs that we're going to talk about. So the first area, and it's one of our larger, is taking a look at instruction. And this is an area where you are seeing some modest increase, 2.46%, just over $400,000. And in doing so, we're looking at actual budget-to-budget increase. Notice we're not talking about additional considerations at this point in time. But what does that amount to? Where are these increases coming from? Well, we're looking at contractual salary increases. And in these cases, when we talk about contractual salary increases, know that we have some legal obligations despite the challenges that we have before us with negotiations, and we certainly have to account for them. We see some decrease in our homebound instruction requirements, which will relate to a bit of savings, a little bit of increase in textbook and instructional material purchases. And then one new item that kind of popped in is that we have a lot of materials that we photocopy related to Common Core materials at the elementary level. And we actually have those photocopied and through BOCES. So we've been accounting for that in a variety of ways. So we directly flipped it into this budget category. So an overview of each of the individual codes within the instruction category. And you can see it goes all the way through salaries, textbook supplies, and other expenses and materials to result in the numbers that were highlighted before. The co-curricular budget, a modest increase once again, 1.63%, and an increase you can see of just $2,000. In doing so, when you look at this, we're just looking at some modest salary increases related to the programs that we're currently running in our schools this year. And here we're looking at clubs and a lot of those other activities that our students enjoy across all of our schools. So curriculum improvement, administration. So there's some areas here that stand out. Again, looking at a larger percentage increase, 4.24%. Here we actually had a coding change or a recategorization of one employee who's been moved from another budget area to be appropriately accounted for. We actually learned, and it's one of those things, you go through the process year over year and you make adjustments. And we found that one of our 4 school secretaries was actually sitting in another budget category and should be appropriately listed here. So when you look at that increase, almost 3% of it is just from an accounting shift. It's not new money, not changes there. We also moved Rubicon Atlas, which is the portal in which our teachers are documenting all of our curriculum. We moved that into this area. And then when you step back and look at it, the reality, the budget-to-budget increase here, we're looking at less than 1% or $15,000. And then here are some of the specifics, of course. Our library budget points. Certainly not exciting. Interestingly enough, that 0.07% is the same number as our tax cap. That continues to haunt us, I think. But in reality here, no great changes in our library. We've had some staffing changes due to retirements and bringing new staff in. There's been shifts in those expenditures that have worked in the district's favor. In instructional technology, now this is a big number, and a number that does stand out. And we referenced this a little bit at the last budget meeting when we talked about our debt service. And we talked about our approach to technology this year. So rather than going out to finance some of our technology as we typically have done, we're actually taking 2 different steps this year. And it's seen an increase here while we're not seeing an increase for technology on the debt service side. We're not going to lease new technology this year. So there won't be a lease payment that we'll have for our technology. What we're actually doing is we're going to be able to use Smart Schools grant money to be able to purchase devices that we're going to use in our classrooms. We're also going to use that to install Wi-Fi at both of the elementary schools. But what we need to do, though, is to be able to invest our infrastructure. We have a switch that we need to replace to be able to support our network. So some of the costs are embedded here within that $86,000. And then another area, we've actually, one item that we've never dealt with in the district is actually having a supply line for technology. So if something were to break mid-year, we are always robbing Peter to pay Paul to be able to support our technology needs. So if we have a projector that dies in a classroom, a smart board that fails, now through technology, Mr. Lubinsky will have access to funds to be able to support those ongoing needs in the classrooms on a daily basis. Other than that, we look and we see what the actual other increases are besides that one funding shift there. And we're looking at what needs are, just over 3%, some salary increases for personnel. Look at outside contracts related to technology that are increasing, some supplies for Project Lead the Way, and then the transfer out of the Rubicon Atlas, which I referenced on the last set, that is actually going to be a bit of a decrease there. Central data processing. We're seeing an increase here in our actual costs. So when we think about central data processing, you have to think about a lot of our software that we purchase, services that are available to our teachers and to our parents. So eSchool, Edline, board docs where you can access our agenda and the like. Those are all contracted services or licenses that we purchase, and we're seeing an increase of over 3.56% in all of those obligations. And here you'll see BOCES services, other expense. So other expense are things that we're directly contracting with, and we're able to purchase a lot of these services through BOCES. So in turn, we get aid returning back on this investment, so that's why it's broken out in two different ways. So in guidance, which is a portion of the PPS budget, and we always break this out to specifically highlight the guidance department and the work that's going on there. Really not seeing any significant increase. We have budget-to-budget increases that are connected with salaries, as in all the other codes. But also this year we added a new initiative where we're administering the PSAT to all of our students at a cost of about $3,500. So those costs were embedded in the budget for this year to be able to continue that experience for our students. So the overview again. So now, special education. Special education is a complex world, to say the least. And we always talk about unfunded or underfunded mandates. And this is one area where we are governed by many, many different laws and work to do our best to be able to provide all of our students with IEPs, students that have specific learning needs, with the services that they need to be able to achieve their personal best. So we thought we'd stop, take a second, and provide a little bit of an overview of some of the challenges that we face in funding special education, some of the changes in laws and regulations related to special ed. And to do so, I'd like to ask Scott and Gail to come up and kind of walk us through the next few slides.
Thanks, Chris. As Dr. Harrison indicated, certainly things have gotten complex, and they continue to get more complex over time. You can see some significant increases in terms of financial obligations regarding special education. Special education is an area that is largely driven by both state and federal law. So many of the things that are driving costs are things that we don't have any control over in terms of being able to say, oh, we're not going to do that anymore, because they're governed by legal mandates. Some of this story is going to be told in the numbers, and some of it's going to be told in the nuances within the numbers, and we're going to try to paint both of those pictures in the next couple of slides. Starting with excess cost aid, you can see that indeed, even though our overall costs and our expenses and our complexity of the needs of our students has increased, the amount of state aid that we get has reduced. And one of the ways that happens is the way excess cost aid is calculated is each district in the state has a threshold that they have to meet before they get any aid back on a very expensive type of placement. So if we have a student that's in a BOCES placement or an out-of-district placement of some type typically, and some of our students even in the district who have, for instance, one-to-one aids or more expensive programs, we calculate and send in the paperwork for what's called excess cost aid. There's a threshold that you don't get any aid below that number, and above that you get a percentage, which is also determined individually by district. Each year that threshold has been going up, so there's a larger percentage of our costs for which we get no excess cost aid. So our numbers have overall in the last 10 years gone down $36,000, but our expenses have gone up even more. So the deficit between state aid and district expenditures has increased.
And that threshold is on a per student basis?
Per district.
Oh,
So
per
each district is determined based on their wealth of the district is determined what the threshold is. Some of the things that you'll see is, again, as Chris talks about state aid and the changes that have happened and the 2% tax cap and the gap analysis, there are other areas that sometimes get targeted when in the papers it tells you we're getting a big state aid increase. Sometimes they make these other changes in the background that aren't highlighted that are actually taking some money back out of the district's pocket in the process. And that's one of them, is that threshold can change, and so we're not getting as much aid in that category, even though the the headlines are the districts are getting more state aid. I think that if you look at the shifts in our disability population, it also tells a little bit of a story. The number of students has remained with disabilities has remained largely stable with some fluctuation, the lowest of 171. The average over the 10 years was 184. We're currently at a high of 207. That's gone up and down over those 10 years. And that, right now there seem to be a lot of referrals to our office and a lot of students that are in need. But that doesn't tell the whole story. So we can also look at out-of-district placements, and then we're going to talk about complexity of need within those numbers. The out-of-district placements, a low of 21, median of 25, a high of 28. Currently, we're at 24. So again, fluctuating around a 4 or 5 student difference in most cases. Although the numbers haven't fluctuated greatly, the cost of those placements has increased steadily over time. As we budget each year, consistently, we tend to use an 8% increase for those tuition costs for out-of-district placements. And that's held pretty accurately for us in most years. Sometimes we're a little high and we're able to put some money back into fund balance at the end of the year. Sometimes we're a little low and we end up having to dip into the fund balance to be able to pay that even though it wasn't budgeted. So those are tricky. And just to give you an example, I mean, we have students that cost over $150,000 a year to educate, and if a student like that moves in next week, that's pretty hard to predict, and yet the district is still obligated to provide that placement and that service.
Is the 24 one a component of the 207, or is that?
Correct. Yes, that's a subset of the 207. Yeah. So again, the numbers have fluctuated, not a huge fluctuation, but the amount of cost associated with those students and their programs have indeed increased. The complexity of need is another piece of that story where I was talking about the color of the needs within the picture, not the numbers themselves. The other health impaired classification, which notably includes attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, has increased from, over those 10 years, from 7.5% of our disabled population to 25.6% over that time span. And those tend to be students who can range from just needing some minor accommodations all the way through students who have significant behavioral issues or associated emotional problems or learning problems that make them complex to serve. So again, the numbers within our overall numbers haven't changed, but some of the categories have changed in terms of their percentage. Autism, I don't think it's any secret that there's been a dramatic rise in the levels of autism in this country and worldwide. In our district, it's gone from 11.5% to 16.9% over that same 10-year time span. Many autistic students have significant programs that are very involved, very complex, and very specialized, and as a result, tend to be very expensive. And again, under federal and state law, we're required to meet the needs of all students. And one of the things we're not allowed to say is, that's too expensive. We can't do that because that's too expensive. Speech language impaired has dropped from 25 to 15%. These are students that in many cases only need speech therapy. So in the realm of expensive programs, they tend to be less expensive to serve. Not that doesn't mean that you couldn't have a very complex language needs and need a more comprehensive program, but by and large, many of our students who are classified speech language impaired have lesser needs and therefore lesser expensive programs. And finally, learning disabilities have dropped from 33 to 28. They also tend to be relatively less expensive to serve in terms of being able to serve within district programs as opposed to out-of-district programs, except in the most severe of cases. So within the numbers that haven't changed too much, we've had an influx, an increase in the numbers of students that tend to require more involved and therefore more expensive programs, and a reduction in the areas that tend to be more easily served with less intense programs.
Before you go on to the next slide, Just going up to the top of this slide, the total numbers of, first of all, the special education population, we're talking special education population.
Correct.
That's the same thing as the students with IEPs.
Students with disabilities or students with IEPs, yes.
Every
student who is
in
classified-
special education has an IEP.
Correct.
Only every IEP student is in our special education budget.
Yes. I mean, all of our special education students are included in this budget line, yes.
It's, okay. And we're at the high now, but you're saying there isn't a trend over time that it's growing?
Oh, there's a trend statewide over time that it's growing.
But not in this district? Even though we're at the high now, you don't think there's a trend? I thought you said that it isn't.
Well, I've said there's been some highs and lows, and right now we're at the top of a cycle, so to speak. It doesn't mean that it won't ever go back down, but right now, certainly the indicators are, given the statewide trend, that we're not going to see a reduction anytime soon.
And you think we're going to grow more?
Pardon me?
You think we're likely to grow more in terms of the number of IEPs? I mean, out of those
It's
10,
possible. The other trend that we've seen over the last couple of years is we've had a higher percentage of students, higher percentage of our students moving into the district who are coming to us with IEPs already in hand as well. So that's also helping to increase that.
Why do we spend so much more on average than other school districts in New York State? When I calculate the average, when I took out the 24 students, it's 44,400 per student, and I had recently looked up New York State average, which was closer to 28 or 29. That's significantly more. What's driving our costs that's making it that much higher per student?
Well, I think certainly salaries in this area of the state as opposed to upstate New York are dramatically different, so your costs of your personnel alone are going to be considerably higher in this area than they are in the rest of the state.
But I would also compare it to some Westchester schools that aren't spending as much per student as well, so just, is there something we're doing differently?
I think that fluctuates, and it fluctuates depending upon what the individual programs that a district has, the number of students that they have, the complexity of the students that they have. So again, that can vary over time, but it's...
Also, how many students a program might accept for a tuition-based brings down their actual cost per student, right? Because they're factoring that into the whole budget. Some districts, when they post something, their cost per student are sometimes factoring in transportation. That may not, I don't know what every school district is doing in that front to be able to say that we're all even in terms of what we're calculating those costs to be.
I'm sorry, but wouldn't factoring in transportation make it more expensive as opposed to less expensive?
Depends.
Well, it depends on what the district is including or not. For instance, one of the things we're going to talk about in a minute is that our special education legal costs were formerly just budgeted as part of the district's legal cost line, and then we created our own line a few years back so that they become part of the special education budget. Maybe another district doesn't make that decision and keeps them in the district
It
line.
seems to me that a good sort of course forward, a good way forward would be for you to see the numbers that Catherine has and
That would be
to
helpful.
at least agree that that we're comparing apples to apples, and then you can actually answer the question. Because right now, we don't know what's in the numbers that you have, right? Because that might not be an apples-to-apples comparison.
Right.
So is that a benchmarking
Sure,
exercise we
absolutely.
can do with the data that we have?
To the extent that we can determine how other districts categorize things, and that's it. But certainly we're willing to look at it.
Seems to me we might ideally get together with a small number of Westchester districts and just kind of compare our costs directly, because with these aggregate numbers, it's very hard.
Very hard.
To know what's in them, because the nature of the students' IEPs
Correct.
is different district to district, and how they account for special education is different district to district, right? What they put in the code, what they don't put in the code.
Exactly.
And so if we actually are able to do a small group comparison among districts, we could probably deal with those issues and see if we're being reasonable or not.
Because there are some things that we literally have no control over. One of them is the tuition for out-of-district students.
Correct.
Right. So that is
So
something.
that's 240,000 of the 8 million that we spent.
No, that's 2.4 million.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't it somewhat discretionary whether to send them out of district?
Yes, but not the tuition cost.
Well, we could look at the
It's
tuition costs.
discretionary to the point where you have to have in-district programs to meet those needs if you're not going to send them out of district. So you've got to spend a portion of your budget on it regardless.
Right.
And sometimes it's not financially a good move to open up a whole new program for perhaps 2 students in a particular age group or category that are going to need a program, and that it's much more cost effective to actually send them out of district than it would be to hire your own teachers and your own aides and your entire instructional materials, et cetera, et cetera.
Is the suggestion that John made, is that something that BOCES can help us with?
Well, that's what, when we send students, we deal with 3 different BOCES, Rockland BOCES, Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES, and Southern Westchester BOCES.
But in terms of gathering, in terms of sharing the data? And,
Yeah. Oh, okay. In terms of sharing the financial data, it's something that we can
Right,
ask them.
It's a question that we can ask.
Yes.
But it's the degree of response and clarity, because everybody budgets a little differently.
Maybe.
Right.
But maybe some other districts would be interested in this kind of benchmarking.
Right.
We can certainly outreach.
Is it typical that over the 10 years, everybody's gone up 100%?
I'm sorry.
Is it typical that in 10 years, everyone has gone up 100% in spend?
I don't think that it's unusual to see significant increases. I think you'd say every district in the state has had significant increases over the last 10 years because of some of the other things that we're going to cover in the next couple of slides as well.
I'll let you go.
Residential costs for students placed in, have shifted from Department of Social Services to local districts. This is another area where there was some of those regulatory changes. When students are placed in residential placements, and we have several every year that are, there are 2 portions of the tuition. There's the educational portion, which is the part for the school part during the day, and then there's a separate charge for the residential portion, which at one time was paid 100% by Department of Social Services. A few years ago, it was increased to a decimal point percentage that the districts had to pay, and now we're up to 30, what is it, Bev? 34%, right? 34% that falls to the district. So it was another area where a year when we got lots of state aid and sort of out of the back pocket they were changing things like this that end up taking districts, take away our aid to a greater degree. So the cost of having students in residential placements, and you can sort of see where some of that happened because it almost went up very significantly. Now, some of those changes are because we had more students that were in need of a residential placement and we had to place them that way. But some of those are just that aid piece.
Scott, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused
Okay.
about how these numbers relate to the other numbers we just talked about.
So this is just the cost for residential costs over the last
And how
several
many
years.
students does this apply to?
It varies from year to year.
Is that,
So
is that, is that,
So
in-
this year, how many?
this year, residentially, we have 4.
Okay.
So
And how many was it last year? Is it, because I noticed that it's gone down,
it went down, 1 student moved.
so that's 1 student. That's,
Literally, that's 1 student difference
For that program.
for that program.
Each program costs something different.
Right.
No set
Tuition amount.
It's based on related services, health services, many factors.
It's more expensive than college.
yes, it is. It's more expensive than college, he said.
The last couple of bullet items there is the ADHD. At one time, it was very questionable whether attention deficit disorder actually fell under special education or not. At one time, there was a question whether it was even a disability or whether it existed. Well, now we certainly know that it exists, and it is very much covered. It was added under the new IDEA in 2004, and there's been a steadily, that percentage that I quoted earlier, the increase in the other health impaired category, is largely driven by that increase of students diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and being classified in terms of needing special education services. So that was, again, a change in litigation. I talked earlier about state and federal litigation. We also have the Office of Civil Rights that weighs in under Section 504, which covers students with a greater percentage of students with disabilities, as well as anybody who has an IEP also falls under 504 automatically. So when they change the definition of attention deficit disorder and whether that is a disability, it increases expenses for everyone and eligibility, which increases the number of students who then qualify. And then eventually, when IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, it was codified under that law as well. So, special education is a continual area of litigation, and every time a court case gets decided, whether it be in New York State in an impartial hearing that someone has, it sometimes sets precedent for the entire state, or if it happens in state court or federal court, or even at the Supreme Court level, generally it doesn't get cheaper. It gets more complex, more involved, more students are eligible, and which I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but it does tend to generate more expenses. We've had some staff increases in order to meet those increasing needs. We've added 3 special education teachers over those 10 years. Just last year, we added a half-time school psychologist to meet the burgeoning needs, particularly at our high school, but it did allow us to shift responsibilities across the district. PPS clerical, we've added 1 full in half FTE increments over the last 2 years. We've added a full-time person and JCOS, yes. So John Cardinal O'Connor didn't exist a few years ago. That's the Catholic school. It's at the bottom of the hill. For those of you who don't know, that's an all special education Catholic school. And although we are able to bill back the home districts for the actual services provided, we are not allowed to bill back for the administrative costs and the involvement of our office in terms of managing all those services, procuring them, managing them, maintaining them. So there's a considerable impact on the PPS office in terms of serving John Cardinal O'Connor School.
Whereby it started, I would say, in the low 20s in its first year. We were at over 40 this year.
40 what?
Students.
In John Cardinal County.
Yes, so they've doubled their population.
And I want to say that going back a few weeks ago, we had reason to believe that the diocese was actually going to pull that school from that particular location. And we just heard today that they are going to be remaining in Irvington. So where we thought we may see some relief on the management side of things, that is not going to be our reality.
Correct.
What is the cost of management from a manpower perspective? Is it just kind of spread out among?
It's spread out amongst the clerical folks and both Gail and I in terms of managing it.
It's not like we have a specific head
No.
dedicated to.
But you can think of it in terms of we have 4 schools in the district, plus our out-of-district population almost comprises another school, and then John Cardinal O'Connor is yet another school. So we actually have 6 schools to manage and the equivalent.
And how many people manage that?
How many people?
Yeah.
Manage, I'm
We were talking about the cost of John Cardinal O'Connor
Oh,
on top of.
so John Cardinal O'Connor, we do not use our own personnel. We contract for those services. So it's a matter of management in terms of keeping those contract personnel, making sure that we have the right personnel, making sure we're holding CSE meetings for every one of those students every year.
No, that's right. And the contracted stuff gets billed back to the
Correct.
home district for the student. But what
But
you're
there's a
talking about is, you're saying that there's been a burden on your time.
From the administrative time and the business office from all that extra billing in and out and managing all of that and trying to collect the funding from some places that perhaps aren't as rapidly paying as some others.
I guess we're just trying to understand how much time that takes.
Right.
And whether it actually amounts to our having to frankly hire another person or not. I mean, if we didn't have this, would we have to have as many people? Or does it
Well,
matter?
you figure that we have
Just makes your job more of a headache.
Right.
That's unfortunate.
We
but
have
it's not
40-plus students at John Cardinal O'Connor. If you figure that's 40-plus CSE meetings every year we have to hold, figure there's at least an hour's preparation for each meeting, and that's a conservative estimate, an hour for the meeting as a conservative estimate, and 2 hours follow-up. You multiply that out, it's a significant amount of time that is being spent on managing just in CSE meetings alone, much
Let
less.
alone the clerical work that goes into preparing for the meeting beyond what Scott or I as chair people would do for that meeting. So it's procuring records, it's setting up the meeting, so a lot that goes into every component of setting up a meeting, but JCO is different because you're contracting, you're dealing with district of residence, which is where the student is coming from, the school, John Cardinal O'Connor, and parents, related service providers, so there's a lot of back end.
Which, by the way, is another regulatory change that changed quite a while ago, probably before this 10-year period, but there was a time period when you had private students that were placed in another private school. Irvington's obligation would be to provide those services wherever that student was and contract with the local school district or whatever. Now they have this, the regulations changed to this district of location, district of origin, current configuration where when the school is in your school district, you serve all the children and then bill the services back to the home districts, the districts of residence.
I was just going to explain that it seems like the total population that you're looking after is more like 247, because you take the 40.
Well, if you add the preschoolers in and the 504s, we're about 400.
So CPSE is another category that you haven't talked about, so I think
Right.
it's worth mentioning, because that's another whole group that has requirements, and those requirements have changed and have created more demand on our personnel to be handling CPSE in preparation for entry into
Correct.
kindergarten. Correct.
So we manage the programs for students age 3 through age 21. The CPSE services start at age 3. There are services for students before that, but the county manages those. CPSE, the actual services are billed through the county, but again, our committee manages all of the meetings and all the time.
So just to walk you through a CPSE case, Raina's a preschool student. Her parent refers her. They have to go through the entire evaluation process. We determine what those evaluations are. There's a meeting held. We determine that she needs X, Y, and Z services, and then it is our responsibility to find those services throughout the county. So it's not as Raina was here in school, and we have our own providers, and this is what we determine. It's a lot of phone calls back and forth, determining who has availability, those services. So you could be dealing with 5 or 6 agencies at a time for one case.
On these are the staff increases. Can you tell me how many teachers in total we have dedicated to special education? With including these 3 FTE we added in the last 10 years?
35, right?
I believe it's 34.94
34.94.
Yeah.
35 teachers. How many teachers do we have overall?
Is that all of PPS?
That's
Or
special-
just teachers? Just teachers.
That's special ed instructional. Tells me.
So that's including the therapists.
Yeah, about 180, 185, something like
180, including the 35 for
Yeah.
special, so 150 for other instruction and 35 for
that, approximately.
And is
Yeah.
that classroom teachers of some sort, or does it include other things such as psychologists and the like?
I believe that includes the speech therapists and
Yeah.
the other, the related
Couple of
service
teaching
providers.
assistants and things.
Right.
The psychologists are on another line, right?
Right, but total, total.
PPS.
Total
Yeah.
instructional
Rather
line
than-
includes
Well,
that.
why don't we just provide a breakdown to the board so we
Yeah.
can see it by category?
And the total number of one-to-one aides, how many do we have right now this year?
We say 24.
I think 24, 25.
25
24,
one-to-one
yeah.
aides?
I believe so.
And that's throughout Dow's through high school? or-
K-12.
Is that part of the 45, Bev? The 128?
One-on-ones would be the non-instructional code, yes.
That's part of the 45.
But
So the-
keeping in mind that not all the aides in the district are special education aides. Our kindergarten aides and our first grade aides that are in our classrooms are not special education per se.
So no, I was asking specifically on the one-to-one aides. Those are all special education aides, I would assume.
Yes.
Correct.
That would also include clerical. So we have
So
3
the 40
clerical, so it'd be probably 42 aides and 3 clerical. It's non-instructional salaries.
I'm sorry, so what's 24 versus 42?
We have,
Or
We have
special
aides.
education aides.
24 is one-to-one, 42 is total aides.
Or let's, I don't want to say one-to-one aids associated with special education services. That's
We
the
have
24.
aides that are in ICT classes, we have, right?
So why do we put the 40? the
We have other aides.
Aides, but they're
They're
not
not
special
one-to-one.
They're
education.
not.
They should
That's
be
what
in-
Scott's talking, the kindergarten aides, we have part-time first grade.
So they
So
should
that-
be in a different, they shouldn't be in special education, should they?
Well, what about like an ICT?
I mean, they should probably be
Yeah.
The
classified. in a
ICT
different-
aides.
Yeah, so again, I think
Yeah.
why don't we
We'll-
break it,
we'll
why don't we
out
break
for
it
you.
all
We'll
out?
break it out for you.
I understand what you understand what Catherine's saying, you know, right?
Right,
That we have them all
yeah,
classified
but,
here.
but if they're special ed, that's where they
Yeah,
coded.
but where are the other aides?
So let's move on.
Okay.
160.
Only special ed.
Yeah,
So there, we've spoken to some of these already, out-of-district tuition rising about 8% a year. Despite increases in tuition obligation, there's been that $33,000 decline in federal aid over the 10 years. Just another bit of history, federal, when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was passed, it was passed with a pledge for 100% funding, and that funding rate has never exceeded 17%. State aid for excess cost, again, has declined. State-supported schools and children residential placement and children's residential project. State-supported schools are like the New York State School for the Deaf, the New York State School for the Blind are the two most well-known. There are a smattering of other ones. When you have students placed in those programs, it used to be that they were paid for directly by the state. That changed a number of years ago, and we are now have to include those in our budget. We do get, again, some high-cost aid back on them. We get funding back, but it has to be now show as part of our budget. Similarly, Children's Residential Project is a project that's a joint effort between Department of Social Services and the New York State Department of Education, where the residential portion is paid by Department of Social Services, the residential, and the educational part is paid by us. That, again, used to be paid directly by the state. Now, no longer. We have to include that in our budget and get reimbursed for it to a greater extent. The John Cardinal O'Connor we already talked about. Legal fees being moved we talked about. So we have an overall 2.3% budget category variance, which is 192 and change. Within that, we have contractual salary increases. As we said, we have a large special education staff, so those increases drive increased costs. And the increased cost of out-of-district tuition, which is the centerpiece of the special education budget.
Can you explain the BOCES?
Yeah,
Well,
that's
'cause that's-
$500,000 a
Right,
month.
because
Bev, do you want to speak to?
the 523,000?
yeah,
Oh,
that's
here.
the out-of-district special BOCES placements.
Yeah, so it's out-of-district
But-
placements and BOCES
In those,
run special education programs.
So that would be on top of the,
So you look at for out-of-district placements, you
two
look at
lines.
the 470 code, which is private schools, 490 code, which is
Oh, I see.
BOCES schools.
Right, so
the
you sort of-
combination of those two codes
Are the
equate
out-
to our tuition expenses for out-of-district placements.
So we're just shifting it from the tuition line to the BOCES line.
Right, depending on where the children are placed.
got it.
so we have a variety of kinds of out-of-district placements available to us. Some are BOCES, some are not, so they go in different lines.
I see.
Back to you.
Yeah, so when we continue with PPS, thank you, Scott and Gail.
Could we just maybe talk about this for a minute before we go on? Because
Of course, yeah.
It just seems like there's still, I'm not really left understanding any better why the costs are going up so much. I get, yeah, we're not getting as much aid, but that's not a big amount of money. It's not evident that Cardinal O'Connor School is really a lot of money, but our costs have basically doubled. If I ran my calculator right, that's a 7% increase a year compounded. Why do special educations rise so quickly? And some of it's population, but mostly it's increasing in the not particularly expensive student categories like ADHD. So I'm not left really understanding it.
So I can't, John, I can't speak specifically to what's happened year over year for the past 10 years, certainly not having been here. But when we step back and we just think that we looked at a figure that was for out-of-district tuition, and a figure there of close to $3 million, right? So we're looking at about 1.8 or $2.8 million, right? $2.8 million in tuition costs for out-of-district students, a number that's been relatively consistent over the years, as we highlighted before. I think we had a high of 28, a current number 24, a low of 21. So we look at a number that's fluctuated during that period of time. And so we look at mandated services we have to provide our children, and we do so in a tax cap environment now where we're held to the theoretical 2%, or in this year, a case where it's a negative 0.07% increase. However, there's no regulation on these state-approved programs, because these are all state-approved programs that we have our children in, for them to contain their costs at a similar rate as a public entity would have to. So when we're looking at that average of 7 to 8% increase on tuition each year, we're seeing that number increase. Now, I recognize that certainly we look at a number almost $3 million doesn't equate to an $8 million budget line. But at the end of the day, we're looking at students that have more complex needs than they did in the past, require more related services than they did in the past. And I have to say that special education services are very rich in human resources and require lots of people to be able to deliver the variety of services that are there.
I think, Chris, it's not that we can't imagine that it happened. I think it's just that the numbers, it's not entirely clear what the reconciliation is. In other words, we should be able to see, just by looking at old versions of this spreadsheet here, how the out-of-district placement costs have changed over the
I can provide you the last few years.
Yeah,
I've got the
exactly.
details. I cannot share it with the public because it has student names on it.
Well, but even if we just looked at this version of, just let me finish. I understand. So we just want to have a reconciliation that explains how the costs have changed over the last, do we want to go back 10 years or 5 years?
I think 10, so we asked for 10 years, and I think, I heard loud and clear that the reason we spend more than the rest of New York State, because clearly the rest of the districts in New York State have to comply with the same regulatory environment that we have to comply. I look at this page, and you tell me it's driven by the high cost of personnel, and I don't see $4 million here. I see 3 FTE. I don't know how that could be $4 million, and I see half another FTE. So what's driving the 100% increase in 10 years?
So-
It's not the FTE.
So we will look at doing what we can over a 10-year window, recognizing that we're looking at Beverly having been here for 5 years, and us providing comprehensive presentations like this for the past 4 or 5 years. Going back before that, it's going to be delving into archives, so there's going to be some challenge in being able to produce the documents that are going to be able to mirror these. Acknowledging that along the lines, there have been shifts in the budgeting as some of the things that Scott highlighted before. But Beverly will do her darndest and report back to the board.
Yeah, we'll just do the best.
That's fair. So,
Do you want to go on?
so
But you're forgetting that there's inflation on the salaries as well. So
Okay, but then that happened with the rest of the teachers, and the rest of the educational budget went up 23% in that 10 years, so it's not driving things.
okay, yes, I know.
So, and we shall move on. So, Scott spoke to the budgetary increases within PPS, another area related to special services, that when we look at this area, we're looking at, here are some challenges with salary increases, but similar to special education, when we have students that attend private schools in other communities, it is responsible, as Scott explained before, of the district of location to provide health services, so think school nurse. So when we have a child that attends a private school in another community, and then those home communities bill back our district. So we're seeing increases in health services for our students that are in other communities as well. Athletics budget points. Athletics is pretty straightforward. We're seeing a negative figure here, which is welcome considering the recent conversation we just had. This takes into consideration new salaries, but Mr. McCormick saw less of a need for equipment this year, so we have some actual decreases within those codes. Employee benefits. So employee benefits is an area that is a little challenging to process. We're seeing a situation of just less than a 2% increase, but we're doing so in an environment where we're seeing some decreases in our contributions for ERS and TRS, which are the pension systems for our employees. We have increases, however, in health insurance, which offset some of those costs, and other related benefit costs that are increasing here. So our proposed budget revenue. Beverly, do you want to do a little overview of this for us, please?
Certainly. The first line in the proposed revenue, the budget for taxes, that is the tax cap figure, $50,890,518. The other items, we already know that our payment in lieu of taxes is going down a little. Sales tax is going up a little. The day school tuition is actually based on the number of students that we can charge that are in our district, and that has declined.
Sorry to interrupt. There's two columns that say budget. I presume the one to the left is.
Yes, we
Oh,
lost
sorry.
the
We lost the top line.
Right, so one is.
So the first column that starts out with $50,927,000 is the current year's budget, the
Right.
15-16, and the $50,890,000 is the 16-17 proposed budget.
Thank you.
So going down, Dr. Harrison just explained health services. This is the other side where we bill outside school districts for students that are attending in our district. Interest, as you know, interest rate.
That again, we build outside?
We
for-
bill for, when we provide health services, for example, to JCOS students,
Okay.
then we invoice their home districts.
And so there's actually a school nurse at JCOS that we're responsible for providing.
But we
So-
bill back to the district.
Correct.
Right.
So when you look at that last slide, when we saw the increase of $70,000, here's just our district's piece of that going to other districts.
Interest rates are still terrible, so that's down a little. The rental of real property, we have seen an increase there with our facility rentals, so we have bumped that up a little bit. We know that BOCES is not going to be renting all of the classrooms next year. In fact, it's one less, so we made that adjustment. We reduced the refund of prior year's expenses because that's actual. JCOS and miscellaneous, we left the same, and we're seeing a minor increase in state aid, and we are no longer receiving the Medicaid reimbursements. So our total revenues are estimated to be $51,000 more than this year, and as discussed in the previous board meeting, I have increased the appropriated fund balance to $500,000 for next year, showing an increase of $78,000. So our total revenue to offset the budget would be $57,793,534.
So and I think the line to highlight at the bottom, so when we think about this push ahead, all the items that we've talked about over the last two Board of Education meetings, when we consider the revenues, and then when we look at our anticipated expenditures, we see ourselves with a deficit of just less than $1.1 million. So here is the overall budget summary of all the codes that have been presented over the last 2 meetings. And with that increase, you see the total change of $1.225 million. You have to take into consideration the 1.095 number that I referenced and the increased revenues that Beverly just spoke of to equate to that figure. And that equates to a budget-to-budget variance of 2.13%. So, when we go back and we think about where we were when we had the first real budget meeting, going back to 3 meetings ago, when I spoke of the state of the budget, and we talked a little bit about that theoretical 2% cap, it's pretty interesting to see here. If it was a true 2% cap, like many other states have when they talk about caps on tax levies for municipal governments or schools, it's a true 2%. You apply, do the simple math, you take your tax levy, multiply it by 2%, and then you add in all your additional revenues and hopefully some increases in state aid. So if we were dealing with a situation where we had a real 2%, look how close we would be. 2.13%. We're right up against that. So, there's some movement up in Albany, the Senate in particular, looking at some ideas to be able to change the tax levy cap law. And one of those ideas that has been introduced and talked about by Flanagan in particular has been looking at a true 2%. But unfortunately, we're not going to see any resolution in the near future, so it's not going to impact us now. But to me, it's just rather coincidental that if it was a true 2%, what that effect would be here in Irvington. So we, just despite the fact that we know we have these challenges, we never stop thinking. We think about our programs. We have lots of ideas to be able to enhance services and experiences for our kids. And in doing so, we had our meeting back on January 12th that I referenced, and there was a lot of ideas that were tossed around. But some of those ideas that really stuck and that were important to us, we thought we'd bring forward for discussion today. Not that we think the board's going to jump right away and say we need to consider these items, recognize the challenge that we have, but we think it's important for the community to be able to hear what that thinking is. So the first consideration, I'd like to invite Mr. Sotile to say a few words, if he could, about a concept that was presented that really would benefit growing out of the middle school, but would have benefit to both of the secondary schools. So, David?
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. So the proposal, or the consideration, I should say, is for us to increase the staffing that we have at the middle school, high school campus library media center. Presently, and for as long as the campus has been in existence, the library has had 1 librarian. And if you think about it, we've got 2 schools on the campus with 1 librarian, which is half as much of a staffing level as we have at our other schools. With 1,000 students that range in grades from 6 through 12, 11 years old through 18 years old. The vast array of needs that are present in that setting is daunting in and of itself. And the time right now, although financially challenging, is right for us from a strategic standpoint. First, because we've been undergoing some change in our library media center this year with a new library media specialist replacing a retiree. There's a lot of work, a lot of thought going on in our library media center. We're very proud of the work that's happening this year. We're really looking forward to continuing to grow. What we're finding, frankly, is that our library media specialist is working with so many teachers and is in so many classrooms and is doing so many things, both at the high school and the middle school, that it's really very difficult. She's in more demand than she has hours to go around. And so that's exciting. That's if we want to think about the library media center as the hub of instruction, as the hub of literacy, and having kind of a reach across content areas, that is exactly what we want. And we want to support that growth. We want to support that movement. And an additional staff member, just from the standpoint of a library media specialist, would help us to do that and would really help us to move our library well down the road, further along toward where we want it to be. On top of that, however, there are some additional benefits that will be attained from this position. One of the things that would make very much sense for us at the middle school specifically is the ability to have a new person working in our library media center really take the lead over our study skills program for our 6th grade students. Our sixth graders, as many of you may know, come into the middle school. One of the classes that they take on an every other day basis as part of their transition to the middle school is study skills. And study skills it really encompasses a whole host of things. One of the big areas that we're looking to push it into, though, is a more robust interaction with the library, a deeper experience with regard to research, with information literacy, and obviously a person with a library media background would be a prime candidate for leadership in that area. And so with the addition of that staff, we would basically take most of our study skills program, would come under the leadership of that person. That would then have one more ripple effect, which is freeing up a person right now who's currently teaching both technology and study skills to be able to teach more technology at both the middle school and the high school level, really, adding to our ability to add new and more exciting electives to both the middle school level, perhaps through the PLTW program, which is something that we're looking forward to for our eighth graders, as well as those at the high school that are obviously something that Mr. Cohen might be more willing to speak about. But in any event, the idea is that with one position, we address needs in 3 different areas that will really advance our program. It's something that, financial considerations aside, that we're very excited about the prospect of doing at some point. And so it's certainly a consideration for us this year.
Great. Thank you very much, David. So, Mr. Cohen, would you mind speaking about the second consideration with respect to Project Lead the Way in the engineering program?
Thanks, Dr. Harrison. It'd be my pleasure. I know we've had the great privilege to come here and talk about our PLTW program on a number of occasions. But at the high school, our main focus has been through our engineering program. And we had a single class a couple of years ago, Intro to Engineering, and this year we expanded that to a second course in the sequence called Civil Engineering and Architecture. And as we've learned more about PLTW over the last few years, we've learned about what it means to have the full impact of the engineering program, and that's having a full 3-year sequence. So in order to make sure that we're providing that for our students, we're required to add one more course. So from a PLTW standpoint, they have 2 required classes and then 1 can be flexed. So the other required class that we would have to add for next year would be Principles of Engineering. By adding an extra class, we need the teaching capacity to be able to make sure that we have someone in place to be able to do that and support our students. So as we've looked, we've identified the ability to add that class most likely into our science load and look to increase from a 0.2 FTE standpoint in order to support that.
Great, thank you. So, Ms. Chapnick, would you mind speaking about a shared benefit that we're looking for here with some technology that would span both of our elementary schools?
Thanks, Dr. Harrison. So this year we were lucky enough to have Project Lead the Way, as you heard Dr. Kaur mention earlier, that we have a parent event coming up in the near future. So with the addition of Project Lead the Way, which has been amazing for our 3rd and 4th graders, our technology teacher is the teacher who shifted to teach Project Lead the Way. And so that's had an impact on our technology integration opportunities for classes across the K-5 classrooms. So if we are to, in order to expand what we're doing with Project Lead the Way, we would need to add increased staffing so that we could provide that technology support that we actually lost this year as a result of incorporating Project Lead the Way. And so the district, many teachers, I think, Dr. Kaur, 100+ teachers participated in the technology plan creation. Yeah, so last year we had a technology summit and 100+ teachers participated and worked really hard at developing goals for technology district-wide. And we have this comprehensive plan, but we would benefit, we really need the support of an additional technology teacher to bring to fruition many of the goals that we laid out in our plan. So we would welcome the addition of another technology teacher. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Joyce. So Ms. Marinello, would you mind speaking about the final, which is another shared benefit for each of the elementary schools?
Not at all. Thank you, Dr. Harrison. Thank you, the board. I don't think you can underestimate the power and the necessity of our school psychologists. And what this ask is asking for is to increase our school psychologist staff to by a half school psychologist. What this would do for Main Street School is that currently the Main Street School psychologist has a .8 position, which leaves, I believe on Wednesdays, Joyce in her building without the support of a school psychologist. These school psychologists work intimately with our students and families. They have a variety of roles. They are CPS chairs. They work with teachers intimately to support students, not just with disabilities, but all of our students. I think we spoke at our last meeting when we did our shared article around the social emotional learning and the needs, the health needs of our students around stress and anxiety, which is greatly increasing. For us at Dow's Lane, it's important for me to share that we have 2 school psychologists. However, one of our school psychologists also plays an important role in CPSE. That's the screening of all of our pre-kindergarten students coming into Dow's Lane, as well as servicing our out-of-district students. So there are many times where Dow's Lane, one of our school psychologists, is pulled in other directions, and I think the key word there is proactive. We are always reactive to the needs of our students, but to be able to build proactive programs, social skill groups, groups that school psychologists can meet with and really support stress at school and anxiety would be something that could really increase achievement overall. So I thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then I think when we kind of step back and we look at all of them, these are opportunities that would impact and potentially have effects for all of our students in a very positive way. Whether looking the first 3 opportunities, really enriching learning for our students, that first concept that Mr. Sotile spoke about, not only bringing more library media specialist services to our overall high school population, but to look at the opportunity to reinvent our study skills program and to be able to provide opportunities to free up our existing technology staff who deliver the study skills program to teach more tech-specific courses. The second consideration, to look at the opportunity to consider expanding our engineering program at the high school and to keep us on the correct pathway to be able to deliver the Project Lead the Way program that we've been committed to at the high school for many years. And then technology at the elementary school, looking at that opportunity to continue to expand opportunities for all our kids. And finally, as Deb just spoke of, the school psychologist. And we certainly look at the proactive component of this, but we have to face the brutal truths that we see in that we are realizing that we have many, many more young people in Dow's Lane, and Main Street community, that are experiencing emotional distress, students that are coming in with emotional needs. And we saw that looking at the high school last year and also looked at a very, very high caseload at the high school and had the ability to bring another half-time psychologist to support our students there, and it's had a great impact. But we look at our youngsters at Dow's and Main Street, and we have students that are struggling with emotional needs that are significant and severe. And we really are in need of more support to be able to help these youngsters, not only in the day-to-day, but then to work with our teachers to develop environments and strategies to be a better support for the kids.
Can I make a suggestion in
Please.
terms of just sort of justifying or building a case for that consideration number 4? I believe last year when you made the request for additional psychologists at the high school, that we related the number of students who were seeking that service to the position, and I can't remember if it's students in IEP, but it's in the actual budget documentation from last year.
Mm-hmm.
But we tried to show that the ratio was kind of out of whack at the high school, so I think in order to support what you're saying, it would be great to have an understanding of the number of to put a number to the number of students that are actually increasingly using this service.
And I see Beverly making a note of it right now. There's an asterisk here, and it's one of those things, and I kind of come back to Catherine and John's comments and questions before. There's a piece to this that goes well deeper than numbers. When we think about this, it's the complexity and the severity of the needs that we are facing that are really the stressor right now. So I can tell you with utmost certainty when you go into looking at this, it's not going to be that glaring differential in caseload that we talked about at the high school last year, but it's the severity and the intensity of the needs that we're facing now, which are complicated to be able to speak about in a public forum because it really comes down to exposing a lot of our students' needs. But we certainly will do that analysis and provide it for the community.
But to Phil's point, how many psychiatrists do we have in Dow's and Main Street right now? Psychologists?
Psychologists. So Scott, we have an overall, how many on staff? 5.5 on staff,
In those two schools?
District-wide.
district-wide.
How many are dedicated to Dow's and?
Two are housed at Dow's, but one of them was indicated our.
Is that Main Street?
CPSE and our district.
So then there's two at the main, the high school
One and a half
campus.
at the high school and one at the middle school. One at Main Street School also works with the two self-contained classes at the middle school and high school campus.
So we'll certainly break that caseload out for you.
And how many FTEs do we have for technology right now?
We break down straight technology, 1, 2, 3.
FTE teachers?
Teachers, yeah.
Yeah, I
Or-
guess, yeah.
Right, you don't mean aides, you don't mean the computer aides, you mean the teachers. Well, we have a technology, we have David, I'm looking at 1.8, right now, technology, and 0.2. Oh, right. So 1.6.
We have Diana.
1.6.
Diana, Gwen, and Marcus, 0.6. And then, so we have 2.6, that sound right, true dedicated technology teachers. But then we also have to be mindful of the fact that we teach some of our technology courses through the arts as well because of where they fall in the certification complexities. So when we speak of Mr. Di Benedetto, who teaches courses that are technology driven in some cases. When we think of also Mr. Constabile, if we think of his courses, that falls within his arts, correct, Raina?
Yeah, I mean, I would
Complicated.
say at the elementary school, we have one technology teacher between K through 5. We have one technology teacher. At the middle school, we have, David, just say it again, 1.2. And that's the required, so technology at the middle school is part of our state requirement. So we are required to provide a technology program. So just to clarify, that means that that teacher needs to be certified, a tech ed certification. So what Dr. Harrison's referring to is that there are different entry points. So for instance, we could have a teacher do computer science at the high school under a math certification. So that's why it's not clean in terms of like, here's how many technology teachers we have. Diana Cassidy is a math teacher who teaches computer science. So it might be helpful if we also broke that out and just put a chart so that you could see exactly how that plays out.
And did I hear you correctly that technology teachers are teaching study skills?
So that's the position that David is referring to that we're trying to shift. So right now, our technology teacher, Mr. Oates, also teaches our study skills, some of our study skills classes.
And
So
in which
our
grade is
goal,
that?
excuse me,
In which grade is that? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
in
interrupt.
6th.
Sixth grade. So your goal,
So our goal would be to have Mr. Oates to really be using his skills and background and have him doing more technology classes and have a library media specialist who really would have a greater level of expertise in that area doing our study skills classes.
Who else teaches study skills now?
Right now, Ms. Hunt? Anybody else? That's it. Right now, Ms. Hunt, who's our home and careers teacher, she teaches study skills. So just maybe as a point of information, because 6th grade falls under elementary certification, you don't have the same requirements in teaching 6th grade classes because there's an application of a generalist that gives you some freedom. So over the years, I would say study skills has been taught by a full array of teachers, and I think it's partly our goal is to actually define it and move it into maybe a little bit more of a targeted, focused area on true study skills and
So
for
that's
transition.
the goal with the librarian, that this librarian
Yes.
would cover all 3 of those grades,
So that would be helpful.
in addition to helping.
No, she would, that person, he or she would provide, would move into and do some of that study skills, but also library. Just, and I know David said it, and it says it there, maybe it was the slide before, we really do not have an appropriate number of librarians to the number of students on this campus. We were supposed to have 2.
So that brings me to my final question. How many librarians do we have?
So we
on
have
each
3
campus?
librarians. So we have a Dow's Lane librarian, we have Main Street, and we have the campus.
And is the thought organizationally, if that position were added, that essentially one is middle school, the other is high school?
I don't think that right now any of us would be prepared to say, yes, we would want it that way. Certainly, we have been very lucky with our new library media specialist. She certainly has backgrounds and knowledge and understanding of actually K through 12 library. So I think we would want to see who would be a good partner. If it worked out that way, then that would make sense, but we wouldn't go into it assuming let's hire a middle school person. We'd go in, let's hire the best person, and then make sure that the skill set is a match for what we need.
So when we step back and we look at that summary of what those asks would equate to, $286,000, and it would equate to an overall budget increase. So again, budget to budget before, without these asks, was 2.13%, and now we're looking at a figure of 2.62%. So with that said, we went through a series of proposals over the last 2 meetings to really look to maintain the programs and services that exist. We just talked a little bit about the possibility of expanding a few. But these are going to be things that are going to be under consideration for the next month as the board and administration work to finalize a budget to present to the community. But we have to consider priority. We have to consider viability and looking at the implementation, and of course affordability becomes that bottom line that we have to consider today. So when we think about those tax cap ramifications, we have to make a determination as to whether we're going to stay under the cap or the board has interest in exceeding it. To remain under the cap, we recognize reductions or shifts in spending are going to have to be made. Remember that figure of nearly $1.1 million that we talked about earlier. So just if we were to go that path, I outlined some examples of what some of these reductions may look like. And I have to tell you, I stand before you kind of brokenhearted in some ways, in thinking about all the good work that we've led over the last 3.5 years. I look at my colleagues and the inspiration that they've inspired, the hard work of our teachers, and then that shared commitment of the Board of Education, our community. I look at PTSA members, IEF members in the audience, and how they've been a big part of fostering the advancement of our schools and the introduction of new programs and experiences that we're so proud of. But we face a difficult time. We face a situation where we recognize that it's a challenge to think about raising taxes. It's a challenge to think about asking our taxpayers to do a little bit more than we have in past years, recognizing it's not a simple economy. There are a lot of folks who are facing difficult times, and there's already high taxes here locally in the Irvington School District. But with that said, we step back and think about some opportunities where we could get to that target figure. We start off with consideration about how we use our fund balance. And we talked about this at length at the last meeting, and Beverly spent a lot of time and did a great job clarifying some of these details. We currently plan on allocating $500,000. We could consider adding another $500,000 in that contribution. And in doing so, we worry about that because we need to be able to come up with a matching revenue in following years. And if we're unable to do so, our fund balance will continue to decline, and it's not going to be sustainable. There was an interesting article that just ran about 2 weeks ago in the Journal News that featured another local school district that's wrestling with this issue, where they're spending lots of money from their fund balance, and are running into a situation where they're having some fiscal challenges now as a result of that. So we have to keep in mind that it's just not free money. It's not just taking money out of the savings account. We're actually increasing our expenditures, and we got to find a way to have revenues that match that to offset that down the road, because it may not be as simple as running with a lower fund balance. We're in a process of this evening approving a new transportation contract. Montauk, who we've had the distinct pleasure of working with this school year, is not going to be returning to the Quad or to Irvington. And we are pleased to learn that our prior carrier, Beverly Hills Quality Transportation, has assumed their contract, and they're going to renew at CPI. So remember that little CPI number. So in doing so, we're going to bring back the previous management that worked well for us, hopefully some of our personnel that we had in past years. But in doing so, we're able to save an anticipated expenditure of about $90,000, which we are forecasting to be the market rate for having to go out to bid again this year. So that's some good news on a couple fronts, the savings and the return of an old vendor who was successful. There's a consideration to reduce building repairs and maintenance projects. Mr. Knowles was here last meeting, and we talked about some ambitious objectives to continue to maintain and improve our school buildings. But we could dial that number back to kind of meet the numbers that we're at this year. Certainly we'd love to see more opportunities to work on our buildings, but we recognize the challenges we face. $10,000 that we are considering for the development of a new website. And then here's where the real pain comes in. To get at that number of $1.1 million, it's hard to get there without attaching some personnel to it. We look at our budget. Our budget is nearly 70% people and related benefits. So it's really challenging for us to find a pathway to get there without having to reduce staff. So in doing so, initially, we're looking at a couple teaching positions. Likely that would be secondary. When we look at elementary schools, there's going to be a challenge. We already have, I wouldn't say high class sizes, but class sizes that are certainly bigger than we'd like to see. We had, generally speaking, class sizes in the low 20s. We don't have elementary class sizes in the mid-teens where we could say, hey, we could reduce a section at a particular grade level and still have comfortable class sizes. The concern when we have 23, 22 children in a class and reducing one section and seeing those classes all increase by 3 students or 4 students is a little overwhelming, and it would interfere with our ability to be able to deliver the program that we certainly want for all of our kids. So we'd have to look very closely at where these savings would come from. And the same with a clerical position. My goodness, we've worked over the last couple years, and we talked about the need to build infrastructure. Last year, we had a real focus talking about infrastructure at the high school and really wanting our administration to be focused on students and supporting teachers. And they were doing a lot of day-to-day operational things in the building that, through the addition of a clerical position, has freed them up and had allowed them to have more time leading in the school rather than dealing with backroom clerical work. We've added in PPS, we've added in athletics and in data. It's really difficult to see because we could probably identify opportunities where we need more support. But we're going to have to look closely at that. And then we step back and think, geez, the school district really doesn't have a lot of discretionary funds. When we get outside of building maintenance and our obligations and personnel, there's very few areas that we can touch. So when we go and we think about what's left to equate to that $100,000 we'd need to claim in this particular model, technology comes to the forefront as one of the opportunities. You think about all the considerations that we just went through, technology-driven, 3 out of 4 of them. When we think about the technology discussion that we've had before and the thought that we're trying to be more proactive to develop a supply line to be able to support day-to-day tech breaks in the classrooms, that could fall victim to this. We think about our commitment to teachers and professional development and the transfer of those training experiences and curriculum work into the classroom. We think about supplies. Those would be the types of areas we'd have to reduce. If we had to get there, we could do it. But I could tell you it would be painful. Certainly taking some financial risk. cutting in some areas where we wouldn't like to cut, and I don't want to have that conversation about eliminating personnel, but if our objective is to balance the budget, I don't see how we get there without doing it. So with that said, tonight, there's going to be a lot of difficult conversation. Recognizing that the next presentation 2 weeks from tonight is the proposed budget, there's a need for the board to give the administration some initial direction pertaining to budget increase over or under the tax cap. And then we recognize that we're going to have a lot of difficult conversation in the meetings that follow. So we have another meeting that we added in April, on April 12th. So following this presentation, there'll be another 2 meetings for us to discuss before we get to the adoption of the budget. So with that said, an overview of the budget dates. So the 5th and the 12th will be those opportunities for the board and the community to iron out those details before we get to the adoption on the 19th. So with that said, Mr. Whitney, it's your meeting.
Thank you. And I just want to offer one bit of clarification for the people in the audience watching on television, that if it seems like the new budgetary considerations are coming out of left field, given the fact that we have this tax cap, this page and these positions are not really new to the board because they were shared with the board at a meeting in January where we did our, January 12th, where we had our roundtable with the administrative team, and they essentially said these are our needs. Now, what is new for us, obviously, is we didn't have numbers against these individuals, against these positions. So that's new tonight. We didn't know that the total new considerations were $286,000. But this is something that was definitely discussed publicly and shared with the board back on January 12th. So just with that provision, I think what I'd like to do is, again, try to break down our discussion into pieces. And I think the first thing that makes sense is to let's have questions related to the presentation itself, because there's lots of numbers that were just thrown at us, and I know I have some questions about some of the numbers. So we'll start there, and then we'll work our way through the new budgetary considerations and finally discussion about cuts related to staying under the tax cap. So I'll begin with anybody who has questions specifically about the numbers. If people need a few minutes, I have a couple of questions I can quickly go up with, or yeah, but we're not ready to take, this is where the board.
I have to leave, and I came specifically to talk about emergency circumstance.
Okay.
And I have someone who has to leave now, so I'd like to get that in, and then you can pick up the budget discussion. Because there was an emergency today.
I understand. Just let me confer with Dr. Harrison.
Sure.
All right. I think in view of the fact that you've been waiting, it's fine. Just remember, it's, yeah. Understood. We have, please, 2 minutes. That's what each person.
It's not going to take long.
Okay, thank you. Please go to the mic and tell us who you are.
Okay. I'm Beatrice Block Iconetti. My sons are William and Francis Iconetti. They're in the high school. They go to half-day here, and they go half-day to BOCES. There's been a lot of problems on the bus that ferries them back and forth. I've called about 4 or 5 times. There's been bullying and physical abuse. And I've asked for an adult monitor on the bus, and I've been refused. Today there was a very severe incident, and it happened again in the afternoon. There's a girl on the bus, and I'm not going to say who, but your needs for a psychologist is well placed. But be that as it may, as it manifests, bullying should not be allowed. And you need to have supervision. And the reason why I'm here is because I tried to call and get through to the superintendent, and the personnel in the office refused. And I said, this is an emergency with a capital E. I need to talk to the superintendent. And she refused. And later on in the afternoon, one of the kids had a nail that he took from one of the, I don't know, one of his classes. There are no emergency procedures in this district about what to do on a bus. That's really important for you to consider. Another thing is that there's no adult monitor on that bus, and there really needs to be an adult no matter what, even if the kids are in their upper teens. Somebody has to be able to mediate difficult situations, especially when there are kids who can't monitor and mediate their own behaviors. Regarding emergency situations, there are no guidelines for the bus driver. It takes much too long for the bus to go from here to BOCES, because obviously the bus driver is going slower than she needs to go because she's got to pay attention to the issues on the bus. That's unacceptable. You've set yourselves up for a very dangerous situation, and if there was an emergency today, you guys would be on the hook. And I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm very angry about this. And I'm not blaming anybody, but you've got to do better. You can't wait for an emergency situation where lives or issues or accidents occur. There was a major accident in this district long before a lot of you were here, and a child died. And I hope that you don't ignore the fact that these things have to come into place, because a death would be absolutely out of order. One of the things that I realized and I thought about today is that communication is abysmal from parent to administration in an emergency. There's got to be a set of procedures in place, and you've got to test it. The internal communications between within Irvington of support personnel to people in decisive positions has to be immediate. If there's an emergency, I can't be told that someone's in a meeting and he can't be disturbed. It's an emergency. I don't call every day. Okay? The other thing is the communications between BOCES and here. BOCES handles those kids very well. As soon as I call them, they meet the bus and they go on the bus and they start to handle it. But the fact that there's no follow-through here, when the bus was coming back, that's when the kids started taking out small weapons. I don't like that.
Ms. Block, I just
And I'm
wanna-
done.
Okay, thank you, because it's been about 4 minutes, so.
Okay,
I
so...
know it went fast.
So
But
I hope you took notes, because there are really some very severe issues. You can talk about budget all you want, but if you're going to have a Sandy Hook, it's going to change the community completely. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, and I'm very sorry about what happened to your son today on the bus. Obviously, we are not happy when these sort of things happen.
I need to know about this.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate it.
Okay.
Dr. Harrison, you want to respond, or you?
Just for the record, certainly every student's safety and well-being is our top priority. And while I was not available when you called today, Ms. Block, I can certainly attest to the fact, and I believe you will as well, that Ms. Miller, Assistant Superintendent who oversees transportation and is number 2 in our organizational chart for the school district, did manage the situation, did speak with you on multiple occasions. She engaged other administrators as well. Mr. Palermo was involved, Ms. Krieger was involved, Mr. Cohen was involved. So we had 3 senior level administrators beyond Ms. Miller, that were addressing what your concerns were. Beyond that, we had the transportation staff involved. So I don't want you to leave with the impression, and we talked about this prior to the meeting as well, and we've enjoyed a positive relationship up until this point in time. So your boys, as well as all the other nearly 1,800 children in the district, are our priority. And this concern today drew the attention of 4 senior level administrators that focused on that. You can be certain that I was apprised of every situation, as I always am, and it was well managed, and that there are plans to follow up with investigation tomorrow to address the situation thoroughly, and there will be follow-up that you will receive from the appropriate administrator.
There needs to be a monitor on the bus tomorrow to manage the children who can't be managed by themselves. You can't expect the driver to do that while she's driving. That's just unreasonable. Good night.
Good night. All right, so we will continue with our questions from the board. I think John, Michael, Catherine, would you like to start off?
Yeah, let me just noted some things I can
Yep,
ask.
thank you.
Questions. Looking at the instruction budget and the three, this is page 9, for detail. The three teaching salary lines, which are the top 3 lines. What caught my eye is that the secondary school teaching line, the third one, is increasing by a much higher percent than the 2 primary school lines. And I'm wondering why that is. Is it a function of the,
There's other items besides salary in there. Health insurance waivers have to be included on salary lines because it's taxable income. And a few people changed, or new hires have health insurance waivers, so that increased as well as salaries.
but, okay, but does that account for the almost it's more than $100,000 difference
It's 281,000.
versus
And that's,
adding the other 2 together is like 130.
Right, well, it accounts for about 30,000 of it.
Okay, so that's not most of
There's
it.
also an increase in summer curriculum work based on what we did this year. And the rest is doing right on steps, sorry.
So there are more teachers in the secondary school who are on steps that are increasing a lot than there are in the primary, and that must be the major thing.
Yeah, it's on, the rest is steps.
Mathematically.
Yeah.
So meaning that we have more of our primary school teachers are at the top of the step system now, relative to secondary?
Yep, could be.
How about, why don't we just break that down, for our next meeting? Or you can follow up with an
I
email.
will send it to you.
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
For the meeting, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, right.
Because it's, I'm just, the source of this is we're talking about a lot of factors, but I'm just trying to isolate the important ones, and the important ones are the ones where there's a lot of money attached to it. And there's a fair amount of money attached to the secondary school teaching. Sorry. There is a lot of money attached to secondary school.
Yep, I can
So
send
it's
you,
just why I'm trying to understand it.
I can email you the detail.
Okay. Moving on to page 12, where you say, and this relates to page 13, there is a large, well, $51,000 increase, 51,612 increase, has to do with the recoding of one clerical staff member.
That is in, it's steps,
What?
plus that one person.
Okay, but that's in the supervision
It's in the
line
20,
160.
yeah, 2020, 160.
Okay, so the obvious question is where is it being taken out of? Where are we seeing the decrease?
It says on the bottom of that page, it's recoded from 2110, 160.
Which is,
So that was the page that you were just looking at.
oh,
And if that non-instructional salaries, you'll notice it went down $3,000, but that's the net result of people getting increases plus somebody moving out.
okay.
Right, so in reality, that line, or the cost that was formerly that line, isn't going down at all, it's going up.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, it's going up.
Net result.
And reality, this one is going up a little bit, but,
Right.
okay. All right, thanks. The instructional technology, line 200, equipment,
Yeah.
You said that was primarily for some sort of a switch? Is that, did I hear that correctly?
The 87.2 is the,
It's 87.2.
It's a change of 86,000 and change.
20 and 50.
Yeah, Jesse, you can go to the microphone.
I know that one off the top of my head.
That's actually a replacement of a storage area network. So out-of-date infrastructure equipment.
I mean, I didn't understand what you said, sorry.
Infrastructure equipment that's being replaced, a storage area network.
Storage area, what's a storage area network?
It's our storage, how we store data.
Oh, it's a server.
Correct.
One server?
An array of servers
Oh, okay.
that are past they're already several years past their date when they should have been decommissioned.
Okay. Okay, I see. And is that the most of the 86,000 then?
That's the majority of it. That's yeah. That's 60 plus the new
$20,000
Correct.
supply line that I referenced before.
And I guess maybe the follow-up question is that, do we need to have our own storage, or can we use some cloud-based thing? It would be
I
cheaper.
think we're in the process of looking into cloud-based solutions for a lot of our data, and we do our backup in the cloud. However, there's still going to be servers that we need to run in-house, for sure. So,
Why is that, for security reasons or for other?
well, no, even for core, just for core services. So, for instance, we use PC-based computers that use a Microsoft server environment. Those servers we would still need to maintain. So even if we move some of our services into a cloud-based environment, we would still need to have basic server functionality here in district.
Okay.
Where is it located?
Server closet in the high school.
Is there any opportunity with that particular cost to do it less expensively than $60,000?
So because of the way we virtualize our servers, no. However, there'd be an anticipated growth with some other opportunities that we're taking a look at, such as a switch over to potentially Gmail and Calendar, things that we're discussing. If potentially we're looking at not increasing costs in the future while still upgrading our services that we can provide, but we're not looking at reducing that baseline of services.
And given the fact that we're operating in such a challenging environment, is there a possibility of delaying for a year, or is that really exposing us to?
So I'll actually say there are other pieces of the infrastructure that we are already kind of in the red on pushing back, which we are pushing back because of the challenging times, and we do have some contingency plans in place, but we're obviously not in an ideal place, and I think we're kind of picking what we have to pick right now. I think there's some other things. If you told me list everything we have to replace right now, it would be more than the 60,000. But I think that we are recognizing where we are and basically presenting accordingly.
Can I make a suggestion? That'd be definitely great to get that list. I mean, we may even have seen it in various forms, but a list of all of the anticipated hardware replacement costs, or
Sure.
So that we can actually think about next year and the year after that, but really consider these 2 years together, since
We can
next
definitely
year
pull
is
that
likely to
together.
be a low inflationary environment as well, and that'd be great to know that in advance.
Great.
Well, yeah, but it's also kind of surprising to me that we spent almost nothing this year on that category, when we had more luxury, we had more
Because
flex
we
in our
have
budget.
the lease.
So, I mean,
Beth, do you want to speak to it again? Because it comes back to debt service, and in the past, we had money allocated through a lease. So that was in our debt service line.
So we're not going out and renewing the lease this year. Instead, we're purchasing straight out.
For servers, we would otherwise have leased them before?
Right.
But there's also been limitations in our ability to use monies for leases that aren't direct student devices. So in the past, we were permitted to be able to get a lease, or in other words, finance technology purchase that would have included infrastructure. But we're no longer able to do that. So we have to focus on things that students directly put their hands on. So we're not able to process this through a lease, so we have to pay for things directly.
I thought we also were backing away from leasing this sort of equipment. which is a separate issue, right?
Well, it's not
We're-
truly a lease, it's a finance, it's essentially.
Well, those amount to virtually the same thing. Okay.
John, may I just jump on a question while we're on this page?
Yeah, sure.
Just the smart schools related purchases,
Correct.
do we show those here and then show the revenue someplace? How does that work?
No, that would be under a separate, under special aid fund.
Right.
So it would not be reflected in your budget.
Okay, so it's not here at all, okay.
Correct.
As a follow-up to that, these sort of concerns like purchasing a server, is that something that we could have used or could use the smart school bond for?
So, yes, a portion of it we could. We did already present to you, we already did go through a process where we did the preliminary hearing, so we could revisit that, but then we're taking away from something else. So, essentially, the Wi-Fi infrastructure piece, so our funds were $277,000, with approximately $190 of that allocated to the Wi-Fi implementation at Dow's Lane and Main Street. The rest of the money going to the classroom technology domain, which would be allocated towards student devices. If you were to take that 60 there, you're looking at $30,000 for student devices, which, I mean, considering you're looking at the budget numbers here, the only thing we're putting in new, because we have that funding that we're now coming out of the budget, remember, we're still paying for the leases for the previous 4 years. So the technology that's been purchased over the past 4 years, we're continuing to pay for that. So we're in a really tight squeeze. We could do that, but then we also have no money then allocated to purchase student devices. And that's, I guess I should add that that's a twofold issue. That's replacing student devices as well as seeing any kind of growth within that student device. Because remember, one thing we did talk about last year is that we've been in a model for years of replacing student devices with no growth. It's really been just a one-to-one replacement model. So if we start to then talk about, well, how do we start to build on top of what we already have? I'll tell you right now that every Chromebook we have pretty much has been because of a grant that we've received, whether it's been through the PTSA or the IEF. Those funds have not come out of our budget. So it's definitely a concern to think about then putting a Wi-Fi infrastructure in place and not having the funds to be able to provide students with devices to take advantage of those opportunities.
Thank you. John, the floor is back to you.
Yeah, I think I really only have one other question. And this kind of relates, the core budget, which I guess is really a push-ahead budget, is there any change in our teaching or clerical FTEs, or are they flat?
That is flat.
Flat.
Represents
And then,
what we have
and then
today.
I know your considerations involve adding.
Correct.
What did we do last year? Can you remind me in terms of our FTEs for teaching and clerical? For the current year's budget?
Sure. So we added a .5 psychologist at the high school that we referenced earlier. There was an increase of approximately 1.0 related to AIS and RTI math at the elementary school. There was a .5 ENL teacher, which was a requirement per new state regulations. 0.5 ENL.
And that person is in Dow's Lane, or is that person across different, or it just kind of adds to our staffing?
Dow's Lane.
Physically housed there, yeah.
Okay.
Our 1.0 ELA coach,
1.0 ELA coach.
or we termed it our secondary instructional coach.
Yeah, right.
We added a 10-month clerical at the high school.
Okay.
We had a 1.0 special education teacher that was needed to fulfill schedule requirements at the high school.
1.0 special education.
And then we added a 1.0 maintenance employee.
1.0 maintenance. Okay.
And the stipend for special ed chair.
Correct.
And the total on that was,
347.
and then including fringe benefits was 468, 733.
Correct.
So, we added, if I'm doing the math right, we added In terms of faculty, including psychologists, we added a total of 4 FTEs, I think, 3 fulls and 2 halves.
No, I'm counting 6.
And half a psychologist, a full AIS, half a ENL, a full ELA, the literacy coach, and a special education teacher. Those are the faculty
I
positions.
get 4.
That's 4 altogether, right? Maybe I misspoke. And then one clerical, and then a
And one
custodian.
maintenance.
Maintenance, right, it was maintenance, not custodian. Okay, is that right? All right. And the considerations this year in total, leaving aside whether we would do it or not, would be, well, I can see, okay. 2.7.
Yeah.
2.7. And then we're possibly talking about reducing to 2 plus 1, 2 teaching and 1 clerical. And that's, assuming we don't add anybody, we would talk about, that was at least what the superintendent's ramification slide talked about.
Yep.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. That's all I got now. I will have thoughts, but those are the.
We'll come around to
that's fine.
thoughts. Yep. Michael, Catherine, anybody want to ask more questions?
So on the task cap ramifications, I would like more detail on the.
No, this is on these, not that, on the detail. We're going to come to this as a separate discussion.
Okay, no, I don't have any more.
Okay.
I'm waiting for the tax
Right,
cap
right.
ramification.
I promise you we'll get to that. Michael?
No.
No details? Okay. I just had one question about BOCES services, and maybe you said it at the beginning, and I was still in transition. So this would be page 9, the 20% increase in BOCES services there, so it's $28,000. And then it's also on the page 12 with the 13 with the 37% increase in BOCES and a 15% increase in BOCES for supervision BOCES. So it's just, a lot of our BOCES lines are going up, double digits, and I was just wondering what's causing that to happen.
Those are just the estimated costs and services. Do you want a detailed list of those?
Well, I just generally, why do we think our BOCES costs are going up so much this year? Are we asking for more services?
There are so many that I can't remember all of our BOCES services.
Is this something that I guess let's start with, are we driving these costs, or is this something that they've changed in the way they're charging us? How about this? Because there's no point in going through, why don't we just make that a follow-up?
Yep.
Because it's not worth going through the binder now, Bev.
Well, the 2110-490, the BOCES, 20,000 of that, Dr. Harrison described that now includes that BOCES photocopying.
Okay, that's the BOCES photocopying,
All right,
right? Yep.
that we used to beg, borrow, and steal from other codes.
So is there a saving then that we would expect to see?
Well, just,
There were random budget transfers to pay for real operating costs
Yeah.
to produce student instructional
sometimes it
materials.
was as little as, $50 here and $10 there. We covered it, and we moved it however they needed the photocopying, we had to cover.
But we'll provide a detailed list for
Okay.
you. It'll be easier that way.
My technology question was answered before, so I think that's it.
Actually, I do have a question.
Yeah, please.
On the athletics budget, Artie, what are you cutting 63%? Why, the equipment?
So we both.
How are you able to manage that?
Artie, can you go to the mic, please?
Just going to play half-court basketball from now on.
This year's budget had a large purchase of a pole vault pit, which was a large number. Now that we have that cuts the budget line down in equipment again, back to where we've been in the past, so that's why the reduction there.
Oh, so this is just normalization?
Right.
Okay. And you've reduced the chaperones?
That was based on actual usage.
Okay.
Just as a matter of reference, Artie's equipment request this year is for field hockey goals, lacrosse goals, and soccer goals, totaling the $12,000.
Suitably goal-oriented.
And maybe another way of thinking of the BOCES costs is if we said we want all those lines to remain equal to last year, then you'd say, fine, we can do that, but actually we're gonna end up going over because these are services that there's no way we can control those costs because these are services that are.
Yeah, so we have to look at what they are. So like when we come back, some of them speak to, it's services that we buy through BOCES. So we're looking at Edline, we're looking at eSchool, we're looking at Board Docs. So there's services there, I'm sorry?
Finance manager?
Finance manager. So we're purchasing a lot of our systems through there. So there's growth there, but then there's also increases in administrative costs by BOCES that we don't control. So those are passed on to us from BOCES.
That's why I was asking.
So, but it'll be easier for Bev to
Yep,
spell it
I'll
out than try to
detail
go
it
line
out.
by line.
Right, of
Because
course.
BOCES, as you see, is scattered everywhere.
Well, is there at some point in the board's operation, is there room for us to ask whether we and other districts should try to get a better handle on BOCES operations so their spending doesn't go up so much? I mean, because we just kind of rubber stamp everything they do at this point, right? And that's not necessary.
So there's certain components of their budget which our board does vote on, and you have a say on it, but the administrative budget is outside of that. So that would be,
Is
that would be,
they just make it up on their own, or just the answer to somebody?
Their contractual costs.
yeah, well, I don't want to make it seem that they're making up their budget, but they identify their costs and they're approved by their board and then passed on to
We vote
constituent districts.
for their board, correct?
Yes, we do.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
So my point was going to be that there's political pressures that certainly our board and can provide, and I believe Mr. Hanna is our representative to.
I'm just thinking maybe they need to, I'm sure we're not the only district with this issue.
Right.
Unless they're just deciding that Irvington won't care if they get billed more and other districts less.
Well, why don't we revisit this after we find out the detail
Yeah,
behind it?
It's
Right.
nothing we can do about, it's not an issue we can deal with
Right.
right now, but it is an issue, sort of a more medium-term issue.
Yeah. I have no additional detailed questions, from my board colleagues? No? Okay. So let's move on then to.
I'm sorry, there's one I found here among my many notes. In reference to both here and previously PLTW, there's an explanation that there are required classes. Can you speak to that? Who requires them? Why are they required? If we don't do it, what's the consequence of not doing a new class?
They throw us out.
Secede from the New York Union.
Yeah, we're required at the high school level to have a sequence. So for years, we did not have that, and yes, they would have, at this point, it just coincided that the last year when we were putting it in, they were also contacting us to say that we were out of compliance. So they do require that we.
Who is they, though?
Project Lead the Way.
Project Lead the Way, okay.
So at the high school, we are required to have a sequence. And so adding that course is an expectation for being part of that program. And it's a quality control approach that I think they're trying to hold true to. At the middle level, we have a grant. So in applying for that grant and being part of the middle level program, which is called Gateway, we are required to implement the 2 foundational courses. So we implemented the first one this year, the designs and modeling, and we committed to implementing robotics next year. The grant that we received was a 2-year grant. We received $10,000 last year, and we'll receive $10,000 this year. And that was through Bemis Corporation. At the elementary school, we are not required. At the elementary school, we have a lot of flexibility. Our goal was to implement 4 units of study per grade level, and we quickly found out with one technology teacher that was impossible, or even just in terms of time. So at elementary school, we have flexibility.
Okay, so I need a glass of water for this. Excuse me. To get to the really important discussion now. We have two components of it, which is actually considering new additions, which frankly we have to think about in the context of going over the tax cap. I suppose it is possible that we could enact all of the reductions that Dr. Harrison just outlined, and then we would even cut more in order to add some of these new considerations in. That is conceivable, but that seems like an unusual scenario. So I think we have to consider the new budgetary considerations in the context of going over the tax cap. So what I think it makes sense to do really is, before we even talk about those, to talk about the tax cap ramifications. Because I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about the new budgetary considerations at all, but we should at least get through the tax cap ramifications and get a sense of what the board's appetite is for giving instruction to our administration to explore this further in preparation for the meeting on the 22nd, and which of these things are sort of lines in the sand that we don't want to consider, lines that just are, that we don't want to cross. So for example, looking at tax cap ramification number 1, increasing our fund balance by $500,000, so that would be, I'm sorry, pardon me, let me just rephrase that, our fund balance appropriation by an additional $500,000 to a total of $1 million, which would leave us with approximately $1.4 million in the fund balance. I have a specific question about that, just to kind of talk it through, and that question is, if we take $500,000 from the fund balance, appropriate it for use in the budget for a total of $1 million, and we're not able to replenish the fund balance, then the fund balance obviously goes down by that amount.
Correct.
Right. So if we assume that we're able to replenish the fund balance at the end of the year by $500,000, then our fund balance would not be 1.4 million, but it would be more like 1.9 million. We wouldn't be at the full 4%, but we would be at a lower number than that.
Correct.
Right. And then the following year, meaning 17, 18, I believe, we would now have $1 million kind of variance, right? Because we would have $1 million appropriation that we would then have to figure out how we're going to pay for, or we would have to raise taxes, essentially, right?
Yep.
So we would take another $1 million if we're not going to pass that on to the taxpayer.
Yep.
And that's when it goes down. That's the analysis. So I just, okay.
Right.
So just to be clear, Ms. Miller did explain this to the board a couple of weeks ago, and I just want to make sure that.
Because it's not sustainable.
Right, exactly.
And remind me again what the percentage is, it's a minimum?
The maximum is 4%.
Right.
And our board policy is a minimum of 1.5%.
Does anyone feel that this is the tax cap ramification sheet, is this something we want to continue to explore? And if so, do we want to continue to explore discussing the fund balance appropriation, the additional money, or does that pose too much risk to our district? Because now is really the time for us to have this conversation in order to give, and it's not the final conversation, but it is a conversation that's necessary in order to give Dr. Harrison direction on the 322 budget.
I mean, it speaks to my overall concern, but I think the key terms that I think about this discussion are our strategic success and our sustainable strategic success. So if we're using up our fund balance, as Dr. Harrison referenced, there are many other districts that have been eating away at their fund balance, and it's as we just heard, it's not a sustainable strategy. So if we don't know how we plan to deal with it in the future, we are weakening our position, I believe. So that's my feeling about the fund balance. And
so you would be in favor of not using the fund balance to this degree?
I'd be hesitant to.
You can change your vote later, but we just have to give them some direction.
I mean, there's a lot of challenges we have to balance. I think it comes down to, at the end of the day, all our stakeholders as a community, as faculty, as administrators, that we have to find a path towards sustainable cost structure while continuing to improve education. And there's a lot of different moving parts to that. So generally, I wouldn't want to use it, but we might find ourselves this year considering it.
Right. John, do you have a point of view on this? I think when we met 2 weeks ago, you had a very clear way of sort of expressing the tension between using the fund balance and our so-called surplus that happens at the end of the year.
Yeah, I won't try to recreate that, but I mean, there are broader issues about what we should do about this budget, given that, you know, do we consider the considerations? Do we consider, you know, or do we cut enough to stay under the tax cap, or do we go over the tax cap, and how much should we go over? I mean, it's not inconsistent, I think, to go over the tax cap some and also cut some, which is where I think we should go. I think we should share that burden between you know, we should cut, and I think that probably needs to be in the staffing area, because that's our main cost, and that's where our costs are going up a lot more than inflation, which is a problem. But I think we also should ask the taxpayers to bear some of the burden and to support some increase in taxes too.
On the question of fund balance?
On the question of fund balance, I look at our fund balance as a district asset that it's like a building in a way. You can use it, but you can only use it once. Once you use it, it's gone. And that's why, you know, we have a hole in the budget. It's not like you can keep using that budget. So I don't think we're in the emergency sort of situation where it warrants using that balance. I think that's something we keep for a rainier day than what we have now. And it's not an emergency. It's a situation where we've allowed our costs to run ahead of inflation. I don't think that's an adequate reason to use our fund balance.
Because that's kind of a key driver of this scenario, right? Because if you say a majority of board members are against the fund balance appropriation that's laid out here, then in order to contemplate staying under the tax cap, we would have to potentially lay off 5 additional teachers.
Yeah, and you know, where I might come, I mean, you've kind of structured this not to get the broader plan, so let me just do it anyway. Where I might, just off the top of my head, where I might come out is that 500,000, instead of taking it out of the fund balance, exceed the tax cap by that much, and say, and the message to the community is, it's a tough year. We are trying to tighten the district belts, and that burden of necessity falls on the staff, but we also think it's fair to ask the taxpayers to share some of that, and we're trying to keep the quality of education as strong as we can, and I think that's a message the community is likely to support.
So that's about 1%.
About 1%, yeah. And, you know, we added a whole bunch of positions last year. It's hard for me to believe we can't, you know, it's going to be that destructive to our programs to cut a little bit.
Okay.
It's unfortunate, but it's not, I don't think it's a calamity. That's my overall view on this.
Okay.
So I would almost take out the 500,000 line, and, you know, whether the rest of the details are right, like whether it should be, you know, that's something I don't think I want to discuss right now, but something.
Yeah, I was really focusing on that.
Yeah, and I'm a little leery about deferring maintenance. If it's truly discretionary maintenance, that's one thing. But if it's the fact that we're just leaving ourselves with a bigger bill next year, that's probably not a wise move.
So I had promised in the last meeting that we would meet with our Buildings and Grounds Committee, which we did do on Monday. Unfortunately, Catherine was not there, and I haven't had a chance to go through the details with her, and so that we can come back to the board with a recommendation based on the numbers that we discussed in that meeting. So we'll do that at our next meeting, and on the meeting on the 22nd, and then we can review that and really get to the question that you're asking, John, which is how much is too much in the maintenance side.
Yeah, and I know Gary Knowles had a very detailed list. I just haven't gotten, and you're looking at that, which is great.
Yep.
We haven't, yeah, okay.
My question about that line was that when we say reductions changes 145,000 for building repairs and maintenance, in our push-ahead budget, it showed an increase of 200,000. So is this 145 less the 200,000 increase?
Right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So it should be like a net increase of 60 at the moment, if with taking this scenario into account.
A similar question with the transportation, that's already a reduction we plan to see. It's not a decision we have to make. You're saying that reduction is
Correct.
based on.
So in a sense, that's different because that's a real savings that could easily have been done in the main presentation, but we already did it.
Right, and we didn't know it at that time.
Right.
Are there any other transportation opportunities besides the 90,000?
No, we already reduced it by, I think, 67 this year. So this is an additional 90 that I'm reducing by.
Okay, so any other comments on this particular page?
Well, and I echo the concerns on the building repairs. I walked over two broken areas in the sidewalk just coming into the building tonight, and I know one of the things Michael raised just last meeting was with all the new turf fields and the new maintenance requirements, you know, it's pretty foolish to spend a lot of money to upgrade and then not keep it up. So I would definitely want to take
Yep.
a closer look at that.
That was part of our discussion on Monday.
Yep, I acknowledge my omission there. I think the other thing that comes up, you know, we went through, as you said, John, I think we do have to put some teaching positions on the table, and whether they were the ones that we, you know, the increases we experienced last year, or whether it's something else. I think we have to.
Just the mic, Catherine.
I think we have to take a look at, you know, where we all share the collective burden. I agree. You know, I mean, I think if we're going to ask the taxpayer to increase or bear a burden of some increase, we also have to look at sharing the burden ourselves. So,
What's your position on the fund balance?
I'm loath to borrow from the future. You know, it's as others have said, it's not a crisis yet.
Okay, so I think, Michael, did I ask you about, you said no on the fund balance?
Well, listening to the comments, I do want to make a distinction that it may be worth exploring this path, because there's a different, I think at some point, we all have to share as stakeholders, as taxpayers, as employees of the district, and our other expenses, a way to be able to sustain this going forward. And so my view on sharing that is a long-term, an ongoing basis versus what we make a decision for this year. And so that's really what I'm looking at, and I think that's a distinction, and why I would be open to using the fund balance if we don't feel like we have that shared view.
I'm not quite sure I understand.
I'm saying that we need to figure out a way to have our costs be sustainable going forward, our revenue to be sustainable going forward, and that if we don't have that, and there's a lot of different parts to that, then just asking us to share the pain of taxpayers going over the cap by 500,000 this year and cutting a few positions is just a temporary solution and not a long-term solution. I'm looking at what's going to keep us going and be healthy in the long term.
Right. I would only say that, you know, the assets of this district, which are the many, many millions of dollars worth of buildings that we have, as well as the financial assets embodied in the fund balance, are part of how we run. You know, you need capital and labor to run and produce, and that's the capital part, and we want part of our obligation is to maintain that, and that's maintenance, and it's about you know, it's about keeping our working capital in order, which is the fund balance, I think. So that's my view, but I respect.
I agree with you, but I think it's also instruction, it's also
Yeah.
taxes, it's so that we have to look at the totality of it. And at some point, we have to come to a solution. I'm not sure that we've figured that out yet.
I think we just have to agree that everything's on the table for now and see what the best solution might be.
So, and with the, so the teaching positions, we actually have two votes, if you will, two positions on the teaching positions that we should consider those as part of a going over the tax cap plan. In other words, we would go over the tax cap, but we want to maintain our cost increases at a very low number. And John's suggestion was 1%. I think as a whole, we've been talking about 2%, but Catherine is suggesting that we should think about taking those positions out. You know, my position is that if we're going to go over the tax cap, it's not a wise idea to cut teaching positions if we're going over the tax cap. Michael, do you have a point of view?
Yeah, I agree. I think at the end of the day, we have to make a decision about whether we, I think something's got to give, and if we're gonna do these cuts, we should do them to stay under the cap. Yeah.
But if we're going to go over the cap, should we also do these cuts?
Well, we agreed to go over the cap?
Well, we're still, no, we haven't, but so
Okay.
that, I'm just trying to take this in pieces.
You know, one example, it's different, but, you know, in reading about the one example about another district, or even, you know, looking closer to home, when we don't raise what we can raise at a particular time, we're giving up that opportunity. And so if we do a half override, or whatever you want to call it, why would we do that?
Because the taxpayers might want to keep their money.
So when you say half override-
But do we find ourselves in the same position? Do we find ourselves in the same position next year and next year after that?
Money out of the community.
Well, I think you've taken it in a very negative direction,
Well,
John.
that's
What I'm
what you
saying,
said.
but you're talking over me. What I'm saying is that, how many times do we want to do a tax override?
When we have to, I think. I think we need to keep in mind that this is the community's money, that we have an obligation to our taxpayers to not play games with them. And that's, I mean, so that's my concern. I've stated that in past budget rounds too. It's not a new statement.
I think I'd interpret it differently, but yeah, I don't want to play games with anybody either.
Yeah.
So, John, I know your position is go over the tax cap, but keep it very modest. You said 1%, $500,000. And again, this is just direction to Dr. Harrison. Catherine, go over the tax cap in terms of the next budget that he's presenting? Because he has to present a budget to us that kind of comes together as a recommendation.
I'm open to considering it, but I want to see how he gets to that place.
Right. Of course. Michael, go over the tax cap in terms of the next budget iteration, and we will talk about the teaching positions at that time.
So we're looking at different options, and one of them would be to go over the cap and what that would look like?
Mhm.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to do a limited, I think.
You'd want to see 2% or
Yeah, I mean,
more.
you know, we were only talking about sections, but if we're, I mean, I love that Dr. Sotal used, or Mr. Sotal used the word strategic, because when I think about, you know, when we describe that for example, that first consideration about the library technology person, I think, why are we going to wait on a position like that? Either we're hitting the pause button, or we continue to move forward in a strategic process of improving our district.
So good, let's segue quickly to talking about those positions, because I think I can guess, John, that probably you're not in favor of funding those positions this year, the additional positions that we're recommended by the administration and Dr. Harrison.
Well,
That's the 2.7, 2 point.
Can I separate that, my answer into two parts?
You can.
I think given where we are in our financial situation, I'm not in favor of adding personnel at this point, regardless of what they are. I also have the same response I had back in, when was it, January, when we had the roundtable discussion of this, that I would really like to see the focus on adding positions in that improve, that are more focused on core academic needs rather than we keep, and this was the case last year too, and may have been, I don't remember before that, it's really kind of peripheral stuff, like technology, like engineering, like, you know, these other things. I mean, it's all wonderful to have, but it's not really improving the core of what we do, in my view. So I'm not very comfortable with the priorities that we have.
Understood.
But leaving that aside, I don't think I would support other increases at this point either because of the budget.
Right. Michael and Catherine, turn it to you to comment on these additional considerations. Michael, I'll go to you first because you actually had a comment, and so why don't you flesh it out on whether or not you're in favor of these any version of these four considerations.
Right. I think if we're looking at an override situation, I'm very much in favor of the consideration one. And number four, I think when we talk about core academics, when you have severe social-emotional concerns in elementary school and the class is being disrupted because there's not adequate ability to respond to those concerns, you're disrupting everybody's education, and so I think it serves all students.
So 1 and 4.
Yeah.
Not the other two.
That's right.
Catherine?
So one of the reasons that I've pushed hard for a strategic plan in this district is so that we do have a vision of the future and where we want to head, and that the budget and hopefully the hiring would fall into alignment with that strategic objective. And that's why anyone builds a 5-year plan or even a 3-year plan. I do concur with John that a lot of our hires, even if you look at the list of last year's hires, have been ancillary to core curriculum, and I would actually support moving forward with the technology people because I think that's core to where we want to head strategically as a district, and I would be not supportive of the others.
So that's, just to be clear, that would be consideration 2 and 3?
So 2 and 3, I understand that 1 allows the technology teacher to return to be a technology teacher, so I guess the only one I'm not supporting is the additional half a psychologist.
So, Catherine, Michael, I think, made clear the circumstances under which he would support, which is if we go over the cap. Are you doing it the same way? If we go over the cap, you want those, or is it also conditional?
Well, I think, that depends how much we go over the cap, because I don't know that we could fit that all in if we go over 1%.
Yeah, well, how much we go over partly depends on whether we add those positions, I think.
Well, that's true. So I think it also, I'm assuming that there still would have to be cuts on the table if we're saying we're limited to 1% or 1.5%. And if we add these and then we cut, it just seems sort of contrary to the right way to handle things. So I think we have to take a very hard look at exactly what positions we can and can't have going forward.
All right, so I think in sum, believe it or not, this is going to sort of make sense at the end.
I'm waiting to hear it.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure the audience is too. I think it's that in terms of creating the budget for 322, we're saying we do want you to create a budget that goes over the tax cap. In other words, that does not contemplate the kind of drastic reductions in the budget itself that you had in here. Now, there are some reductions like transportation that we'll look forward to. I think we have more work to do on buildings and grounds because that's the follow-up that I spoke of. And I think what we can do from a budget standpoint is continue to have the teaching positions on the side as a potential reduction opportunity, and then also have these positions here as a potential add. The one thing I would say, and I'm just wondering if any of my colleagues agree, is given the fact that the $21,200 is a pretty small amount of money, and it's only a 0.2, so it's actually not adding a whole nother head, it's just essentially giving Jessica Hughes a full-time job. Is anybody in favor of putting that into the budget immediately, just to make that essentially a whole thing? And does that make sense from an academic standpoint that we'll at least fund that in the next go-around?
You're asking if anybody's in favor of it?
Yeah, in favor of just including that in particular, because it's $21,000. It's not adding a whole nother position, it's 0.2.
It all kind of falls into the same pot, I guess, at the end of the day, right? I think there's a piece to it. Hearing what the board values, consideration by consideration, is important. But at the end of the day, I feel like we're kind of maybe working a little bit backwards. I think it'd be helpful to start with saying, so if the board is in agreement at this date to consider going over the cap, what is the target going over the cap? And we've heard a range from 1% to 2% in the conversation. And I think based upon that, we can figure how we arrive at that target. And, you know, so certainly I appreciate the perspective and the advocacy for that approach, because it does sound quite logical. But I don't want to waste time getting into the horse trade if we're not sure what that target is at the end.
Then why don't we say, let's create a budget that still has us at 2%. We can always cut back to John's 1%. We've done that in the past. In fact, we did it last year, if I remember correctly. We trimmed at the last minute. So we have meetings after the 22nd to do that.
Can I just, my view, which will probably be a minority view, but I'm used to that, is on the engineering, that I am not convinced of the value of doing all this engineering in the high school, and we'd love to be convinced of it, but if you want to go do engineering in college, the engineering programs in college aren't looking for people who have taken engineering in high school. They look for people who take physics and math, et cetera. So, you know, I would much rather see us putting our money into that. And, you know, yeah, you maybe need to give kids a little taste of engineering so they get interested in the subject, but there are lots of ways to do that. I have not been convinced of the value of this program.
Understood.
So we invite you to come to the event on April 7th so you can see some of the ins and outs of the program. And
I'm not sure that will, I'm speaking about what the colleges are looking for. I'm not sure that'll do it either way, but.
No, appreciate your concern.
Yeah, but I'm happy to be convinced otherwise, but that's where I'm, in terms of looking at developing serious people capable and interested in doing college engineering, that's where I think we ought to be going, and I'm not sure that's the best way to get there.
Yeah, I just don't want to get into a feel of defending the program, but it kind of strikes a passionate chord for me. And when you look at the students that the program touches and the wide array of kids that it reaches, from kids that have different levels of ability, different levels of interest, and then it becomes really a pathway that motivates kids to their broader success in school. And we do have anecdotal information, feedback from parents whose children have been interested in pursuing a career or studies in engineering when they return from college visits, that they've been positive feedback that's been helpful. And in one particular case, a parent told me a story where her child wasn't going to have to take some introductory courses that were a requirement for his studies. So I think there's value that goes, that certainly applies to collegiate studies and that level of preparation, but I think it goes deeper in thinking about an audience that we're reaching. And there's a technical component. We have kids that are exploring engineering and the technology associated with the engineering courses.
But then there's simply that idea of kids that are being engaged through the hands-on interactive learning experiences, and I hate to undervalue what that does for a good number of our students.
All right, so to sum up then, these considerations will remain on the side, so to speak, not integrated into the main budget, so that we can continue the discussion about whether or not, because I don't think the board is ready to put these into the main budget, so we'll keep them as considerations in the main budget. Because right now we don't have enough votes without Bob here to sort of get a clear direction. We've got, I think, we have one vote for the psychologist and one vote for the FT,
1, 2, and 3.
Consideration 3. We actually have 2 votes for number 1 and
Did you
2
vote?
votes. I only voted for number 2.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Yeah.
But I thought it was unclear, Michael was clear about what specifically, how much money he was overall wanting to spend, but I don't know if anybody else was. I mean,
It's a question
Are
of if
we
you're.
adding these considerations and then cutting somewhere else so we don't change the overall budget, or are we talking about?
I don't think that's, I think this would be additional to what we.
So, okay.
What we've been looking at, because we've all just said we're gonna go over the tax cap because we're not going to use the fund balance. We
So you're
cannot.
talking about doing the full push-ahead budget plus, I've forgotten which of these 4 items you were talking about.
For me personally, it was just number 2, which is $21,000.
Which, those are the sorts of spending that we can usually find.
Exactly, right, that was the argument. And then in Catherine's case, it was 126, 232. So $232,000.
Crazy mad spending.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was, but, what we were, right at this point, we're just trying to give some direction to Dr. Harrison because he's got to create his recommended budget.
So, just,
Do we get,
just so I'm clear, when we went through all of the increases, all of these increases are actually in the budget, and then from that, you've taken out this,
So the budget, the push-ahead budget, everything that was presented over the last 2 weeks, with the exception of the 4 considerations, was a 2.13 budget increase. With the considerations and everything else that we had discussed, we're looking at a number of 2.62%.
so with the 286, it turns into 2.62. So, and forgive me for asking this, I just asked this because this is how it happens in the corporate world when we get to crunch time. All the departments get an assignment that, you have to be flat to last year. So what would you cut? Did that happen in the school districts, or?
Yeah.
No?
We started out that way. We've been sent. Yeah, so we start off when we do our original budget process, and then beginning of the school year, we go through and look at supply lines and things along those lines. And there's not a lot of money that's actually, that goes to each department as far as that goes. But for the most part, we're flat in those areas.
well, the big difference, Catherine, between the corporate world and here is that we have contractual salary increases.
Right.
And corporations typically don't have that.
But they still have salary allowances, so you make
Yeah,
cuts
but
elsewhere.
they say, or they would not, but yeah.
Building-based budget.
And in addition to that, we have many mandated costs that we can't control as a district, but that in concert with other districts, we could potentially change in the medium term.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, let me put some context for our newest board members, and that is that the budget that he's producing, that Dr. Harrison, Ms. Miller, Dr. Core are producing for the 22nd is not the final budget. It is the superintendent's recommended budget. And in years past, almost every year that I've been on the board, that budget has changed, and in some cases, materially, over the ensuing weeks. So we're just giving him direction about what we want him to create for the 22nd. We can go back in and take things out, add things in.
just for point of clarification though, so the push-ahead budget gets us to a 2.16% increase.
2.13.
So, 1.3, so everybody, nobody here, all four of us is willing to go above the 2, and we can't go above the 2%, right? And then with the 286, it brings us to.
We can't,
absolutely.
no, we can't. I think Michael specifically said if we exceed the tax cap, he wants to go above it. He wants, no, he wants to add those, I think, three? Two things above the 2.1%.
So Michael wants to go to.
He was sort of
2.5.
binary. If we go over, he wants to
Right.
If I were.
go over.
So
and right
where are you
back.
going with your,
I'm just,
trying to summarize?
yeah, sorry, let me let you do that.
No, I just, when I know where you're going, that's fine.
Yes, I was trying to summarize, I was trying to get a handle on where we
You're right,
would
you
need to
left.
go for the 22nd.
Right, so Michael's current position is something above 2.13, which is, I didn't do the math, but it's around 2.3, let's call it 2.2. It's the 2.13 plus the 102, whatever the number is, $200,000. Two positions.
So it's about 2.5.
Right. John's position was 1%. My position is 2%, because the $21,000 is not material. So that leaves us with your position.
Okay. It looks like we're gonna have to go over the tax cap, so I think to the point of, if you're gonna go over the tax cap, you might as well fund what you need to fund.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Maybe others didn't.
You might
either.
as well fund what you need to fund.
So your position would be the 2.12%.
Plus the new
Right,
positions.
and it's not going to be exactly the, because we're going to be subtracting $90,000 from the transportation, right? So it's,
Well, so we are subtracting 90,000, but the,
I'm just saying that the numbers aren't, that we're doing back of the envelope numbers here, because the new plan will take out the 90,000 for transportation.
and that's it.
Well, we still have to figure out the,
Some other potential savings we'll work to
Right.
identify.
Okay.
so that's why I'm talking about a range between 2.1 and what's your acceptable limit above that, if you, those two positions?
I guess the two, somewhere between 262 and,
Right, but really what you want is to add those positions and stay at 2%.
yes,
Okay, good.
probably.
Can I just?
That's okay. I remember saying exactly that to Chris last year. Remember, I said, cut the budget and we want to add these additional things, right? Or stay at the number that we wanted to stay at last year. John, you had?
Yeah, I mean, just because I'm going to say it again and again, I'll say it just so you know. I mean, the problem we have is, even without doing anything different, our costs are going up by several percent in an environment where the CPI did not change, which means that the overall costs for the average person in this country haven't changed at all. And so we have a cost problem in this district. Our costs, and we're not alone in it, but our costs are not in line with what they should be. And I think we're being overly lax about that whole issue.
Okay, but there's still time to,
And that's why I'm going to repeat it, because if we go to a 2% budget increase, I will continue to think, that our costs are high because our personnel costs go
Right.
up a lot.
there was a
And
meeting,
I think there ought to be some shared sacrifice in
there
that.
was a meeting not too long ago where you did say that 2% had a certain logic to it, just to remind you. That you did say that, I think, if not the last meeting, the meeting before that, because in effect, 2% is what we promised our constituents. And so that regardless of what happens.
Yeah, no, it's, I do sometimes think that, but I also think we're, I think we're, we have sort of more systemic cost issues that we need to find a way to get
You've
over.
revised your point of view.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it's all contingent, but.
Okay. So again, that gets me back to the point where these positions, I think, we don't have complete agreement on these positions because we're essentially split on them, so that's why they stay on the side. The additional consideration should not be part of the main budget.
But the main budget you want presented at 2%.
Yes.
Can I ask a question? when I pull up a document, our budget increase last year was 2.43%, is that correct? Or
Yeah.
am I looking at the correct thing?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
And then we left a couple $100,000 on the table.
On people's kitchen table.
You've got that much on your
Captain's
kitchen table?
office.
I'm gonna come
Collectively.
over.
No, I said, and then we didn't
I don't have a
go all the way
kitchen
to
table.
cap last year,
Right.
Michael's point.
Right.
243, and we were a couple $100,000 under cap.
I will say I was at a basketball game just this weekend where a parent talked about our budget challenges, and the parent said, "Oh, go for broke. Let's spend money and take care of the education of our kids." So
I'm just not sure that the math necessarily works, that if you add, 4%, that makes it easier the following year to get over the tax cap when the numbers are as low as they are. If you're talking about, yeah, I'm just saying in general that if you've got a low inflationary environment with next to 0% growth, and if we go over 4% this year using an extreme number, which of course we're not, I'm not sure that makes it easier next year to stay under the tax cap because our costs are still going to grow at 2% plus a year.
It depends on what we do, how we get over. I mean, if we do one-off, if we have, and we talked about this last year,
Right.
if we use that slack to do one-off things, like front-load maintenance expenses and that sort of thing, then it does make it easier because we don't have to spend that money the
Right.
next year.
But we're not talking about that here.
If
These
we
are
hire
positions.
people,
Right.
yeah, then you're not helping yourself, because you're gonna have to continue to employ those people, and they're gonna get more expensive.
Right. All right, so you have your marching orders?
Got it.
Okay. Sorry for the challenge of following this, but it's life in a bizarro universe of 0% tax cap.
Community comments?
Analogous to
Yeah.
the negative interest rate environment that much of the world is having to deal with these days.
So it's late, but we are going to open the mic to comment from community members.
I noticed all the administration left.
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody must have
Anybody
pushed
have a
button.
question?
Please.
Want to clarify something, because that was confusing, I'll admit. No? Okay. Okay.
Oh, good. How much is the PTSA giving us?
Hey, I'm trying to get you your wall, so. Allison Wagasback, 3 Emory Road. Thank you so much to the board for all of your hard work and laboring through this process, and the administration as well. It's not an easy year. It never is, but especially this year. I had like a million notes, but I'm not going to read them all. I'm not going to go through the details because I think that the main piece of this is the question that you all are debating right now, which is what is the community going to accept and what are they going to be open to when it comes time to vote. And as you know, I'm co-president of the PTSA with Shari, and although I'm not speaking on behalf of the PTSA, we do have a pulse on a big part of the school community. And I will tell you that there's a lot of pride going on right now with what's happening in our school district and all of the great news that has been coming out over the last several months. And we're trying to do our part in educating the community even more about all of the wonderful things that have been happening. And I think that we have young families moving into this district every day, and they want what we have right now. And I don't think that any of us want to see us go backwards. So I would say to sort of the point you guys are coming to, which is if we're going to go over the cap, and I can speak as the PTA president on this, that is a huge undertaking from an education standpoint that we spend a ton of time doing. Let's make it worth it. Let's not go over the cap just a little bit. I was trying to dig up, Bev has done all these, you guys have done all these past PowerPoint presentations where you've shown the incremental costs when you go up a point in your tax, how it breaks out per household, and it's like $50 or $100. And I'm not saying that that isn't money, that's important. It is, but if it's 2 teachers for $100, I think that I think most of the community could get behind that. And I would hate to say, yes, please come and vote and go over the tax cap, but we're still going to cut. With regard to the inflation conversation that we're having, you know, the teachers union, what we pay is what we pay, and it doesn't have anything to do with inflation. And that's something that we can work on or not over time or not, but we don't have control over that. And when we're saying we should bear the burden, who's actually bearing the burden is our kids. If we start taking away teachers and technology and support, it's not us versus them. It's not sharing the burden. Who's paying the price for that is our kids. And I think that most of us who live here don't want to see our kids pay that price. To what Catherine was saying with her friend, whoever she was talking to, you know, there is nothing more valuable to us than our kids and our houses, really. And those two things are always in the balance when we're talking about cutting from our school budget. So that's what I say to my husband when I come to these meetings till 10 o'clock at night. I'm protecting our two biggest investments, our kids and our house. So anyway, thank you. Thanks a lot for listening.
Thank you, Allison. I guess some people have maintained their eloquence even at 10:30 at night. I feel like mine is completely gone. Dave?
Yeah, sure. Dave Graber, 55 Hillside Terrace. I agree with most of what Allison said, but to tag on to that, one of the things that I'm a little disappointed in not hearing more spoken about or questions asked about is sort of the biggest chunk of growth in cost to the taxpayer, which is the special education piece. And to something Catherine said about the strategic plan and long-term planning and thinking about, I think that our district would benefit greatly from really looking at that particular subset and thinking about how it may cost a few dollars. We may have to go over the tax up in the front, but in terms of long-term planning, if the district collaboratively were to approach that, you know, when you're talking about a $4 million growth over 10 years, which, you know, isn't necessarily a huge amount of money in comparison, right? But it stands as a significant growth in our specific district. And if we could address that in certain ways and thinking about response to intervention, thinking about, ways of programming our schools so that over time, the number of students, I think it was 27%, right? I think he said the growth of, what was the name of it? The ADHD, that was the biggest piece. And a lot of that stuff is actually addressable in using an RTI approach, where you can save money by not having to send those particular students out of district and spending that enormous amount of money. So I really think that we as a district need to sort of commit ourselves over time to really looking at that. That's all I want to
Thank you. All right, I'm losing my voice. We want to move to our
Rest of our agenda.
consent agenda now. As always,
School calendar for anyone who's interested.
yep, school calendar, shared decision-making. We're going to tackle those two things first. They're not in the consent agenda, 7.1 and 7.2. I pulled them out before when we did the agenda review. So any further comments on the adoption of the school calendar? Good night, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Great, thanks.
Thank you for staying, Maria.
You want to come sit up here?
All right. Any further comments on the calendar that we had looked at last time? We already heard from Dr. Harrison that no changes have been made since our last meeting, which was, I think, a month ago, right? This has been out there for a month.
I was confused about one point that you sent in sending the calendar. What's happening at the end of our school year? The change or no change in terms of?
There was question from faculty standpoint and trying to understand the challenges that they really face in closing out the school year. So there's a logistical piece when we look at the end of the year. And when you think of the physical space in our elementary schools, teachers are packing up. They have to shut down the rooms, put things away because of the fact that we have camp moving into the school, we have construction projects in the schools, so on. So that's one aspect of it. But to really dig deeper, our teachers are involved in very serious work
in closing out the school year from an academic standpoint. And when you look at our secondary schools, the teachers are on an exam schedule, and they have a lot of flexibility in their final weeks to do that type of work, and grading final assessments and closing out the student component of the school year. And during I have to say, in my tenure, if we had looked at that final week, probably in my first year, that was a combination of a couple half-days and a couple one-hour days. And now we've kind of pushed it the other direction, trying to reclaim additional instructional time, but now to a point where we went probably from 2 half-days, 2 one-hour days, to just 2 half-days. So there's been a lot of time reclaimed, we could say, in the classroom. Someone could also question how much learning is really happening in those last days. But all said, they're important days. The teachers union has come forward with a request that we try to have some consideration and look at providing another early release, and the consideration that they asked for was on Friday, the 16th of June, recognizing there's a lot of challenges facing the elementary teachers.
And that's not in here, though?
It's not in this model, no.
So
if the board chose to go that direction and honor that, it would be a simple modification that we could make today and with the approval.
Right. So a half day on the 16th is the?
Yes.
I would be fine with that change.
Right. John, Catherine?
Well, on that question, would we then add back an early release day somewhere else? I mean, would there be a balance on that, or would that just be an additional?
It would be an addition.
Okay. I don't have any strong view on that, one way or the other. I do have other views on the calendar, but if you want to tackle this particular issue first, go ahead.
Catherine, any opinion about that?
Well,
16th?
so, since you already recognize that the burden is probably on the elementary school teachers as well as the elementary parents, I do know that the concerns or complaints I've heard about, it's not so much the superintendent conference days, but again, it's the half-days whenever there are report cards, which are 3 times a year. And
conferences?
The parent-teacher conferences, so then it's usually a half-day one day, and then the other half of the day the next day, and it becomes a bit of a burden for parents. That's the one thing that I thought should be looked at, is there a way to make that easier on the parents for the elementary students?
I would say it'd be tackled in negotiations, potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that the way that it's divided, look, it's always a burden. I don't think anybody questions that. But I think we've actually made it a little bit better by having at least morning and afternoon, so there are parents who can get to conference on their way into the city versus people who would have to leave work and be here at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We would have to go back and negotiate it, though. That's contractual.
Right.
Parent-teacher conferences. I don't know many other elementary schools who do it differently. We can't just shut down school for the day. So we've tried different scenarios over the years, but, and it's twice a year, just to be clear, because the third report card,
Right, the
there's
third
no.
one's right, you're
Yeah,
right.
there's no conference.
Yeah, I just know that that's the challenge.
Yeah, there's no I think everyone would acknowledge it's the challenge. They try and get as many evening conferences in as they possibly can, but there's a limit to how many hours there are.
What's your opinion about the 16th? You okay with that?
I don't have any strong feeling.
Okay,
one
so
way
I
or
think
the
go
other.
ahead.
Can we do it just for elementary?
The other schools are already on a testing schedule by the 16th. They're not even in school.
Well, we wouldn't be not having testing we wouldn't
Yeah.
change the testing schedule, so it would only be the elementary, and it wouldn't affect the schedule for testing.
And it's specifically the 16th as opposed to, say, the 20th?
I'm concerned about getting enough instructional hours in the week to get credit per state aid.
Oh, for that
There's
week.
a weekly number that you need to maintain.
Got it, okay.
And I would say having an early release day on a weekend in June might be a nice thing for people who want to hit the
Yeah.
beach.
It's like a summer Friday.
Something like that.
Wherever they go.
Yeah, wherever they go.
Summer Friday.
Summer Friday, right. As long as the teachers stay here and do what they have to do.
John, if I remember your concern from other concerns were the superintendent conference days that were sort of floating in the middle of the week.
Yeah, well, that concern remains. I don't really think, I don't really understand why we have to do it that way, so that's one, if I read this correctly, there's one of those, November 3rd. And there also are 2 early releases. I mean, why can't we do early releases on Fridays? Or why can't we do delayed openings on Mondays so people have a little more flexibility around their weekends?
I mean, I would only give you 10 seconds of history on this, that there was several years back, we did that, and we actually also got feedback from families saying that sometimes having them on right before and after the weekends, it's great for people who want to travel and go away for the weekend, but we have lots of families that's not the case, and that they found it hard to have it right after the weekend, I guess, in terms of them, sometimes parents, I guess, have to I can't talk anymore, it's too late for me, have to make arrangements for their children. I don't know, I guess some parents maybe don't take a half day of work themselves. We did get feedback that having them always on Mondays and Fridays was actually a hardship. So again, for families that want to go away for the weekend, but that's not our whole community. We have lots of people who work, and it is a hardship. So I would just share that as, again, 10 seconds of history. But to always have them on Mondays and Fridays, again, it's very hard in the schools to always have the same days off. And it's not so easy to just flip and switch schedules around. So we have a lot of Mondays that are national holidays, required holidays.
Well, that's right, because you're trying to spread it around because of the AB schedule, right?
It's definitely difficult. Is it doable? I guess, if we knew in advance, but I guess I would just say it's complicated at
Trying not to
schools.
penalize the A schedule.
I guess where I come out on this is I'm just not convinced by what I'm hearing that it's not doable and it's not a better system. That's my view.
Okay.
It's just, I mean, it isn't.
I realize I actually forgot to move this, but we've been talking about it, that's okay. I have a motion to accept 7.1, the adoption of the calendar, so that we can talk about it. We've already been talking about it, but I forgot to.
It's fine.
I forgot to. Yes, I
Then
forgot.
so moved.
Yes, thank you.
Then we didn't
Second.
talk about
now,
it.
Are we ready to vote?
Yes.
Okay. So all in favor of adopting this calendar? Aye.
Aye.
I'm confused now.
John?
I made the motion. Michael seconded? No, somebody seconded.
I thought Catherine
I-
seconded.
Seconded.
Yeah, Mike had it. Yeah. Sorry, Elaine.
To discuss it.
That was to discuss it.
Yeah, with an early release on June 16th.
So all in favor of the amended calendar as discussed, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. You're not saying aye?
I guess I wasn't realizing that we were done with discussion quite yet.
Oh, sorry.
I heard the switch to start the discussion, but I
Well,
mean,
let's discuss then.
yeah.
The motion didn't pass yet, so we'll
No.
discuss more and
Yeah,
then
that's
maybe it'll
right.
pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Simple.
It's very simple.
I mean, I just I have to concur with John. I understand the concern about the EB schedule, but in terms of the parents being challenged, I don't understand why a Wednesday or Thursday would be different than a Friday, other than for some families it would be better, but I don't see the disadvantage to other families.
To moving it to the weekend? is
Moving them
what you're saying?
to the weekend.
We specifically had, as Rain indicated, had feedback from parents in my first 2 years that stated that their employer did not look favorably on extending like a weekend for them to take time to be able to attend to their children.
Right.
And then you have to also be mindful, not everybody works a Monday through Friday job. That there are people that work shift work and arrange schedules.
But specifically to Raina's point, it was a hardship for people because their bosses didn't want them to always take a Friday or a Monday off or come in late, go home early kind of thing. So that
Right,
was
so they don't get to
specifically-
take a long weekend necessarily, but no matter what, they're going to have to account for the care of their children potentially.
You know, I respect the concerns that we have. I think we're,
Yeah.
for a couple days out of the school year.
But just the
and-
letters that we received were different,
But
so.
that's the-
But how many letters
That
did we
many,
receive?
That's the,
Right.
that's the situation.
I
where
would say
you're-
4, 5.
That's the
How many did you, I
situation.
mean, what did you get before? Is it the?
It was 4 or 5. It
So,
wasn't
I
a
mean,
big
we,
deal.
we've got 4 on one side, 4 on the other. It's
But it
not-
also changes our schools and our days for our kids. So so I'm not minimizing it, but it just seems that, and again, I'm not saying it's not doable, but it does turn our schools upside down when you start changing days, especially at the elementary school where they live on a day-to-day schedule. They don't live on an A-B schedule. So now a Friday is a Monday, or Tuesday is a Wednesday. And it's not as simple as just saying, okay, we're going to do a special schedule now, because other things change. Reading teachers have to see kids on a regular schedule. There are IEP compliance mandates where certain kids need certain services. And teachers, our psychologist is up at one school normally on Wednesdays. Now we're saying it's going to be Thursdays. So I guess for me, I think we have a lot of days where they are Mondays and Fridays. But I also would say that it is a hardship on our schools, on our principals. Changing schedules in schools is very complex. We don't just do it. Everybody changes. So I guess I am wondering if it's worth that, if it affects our schools that way.
I'm sorry, like you have me like dancing here on the edge of my seat. There's like 2 really critical things that you said there. Is that idea of alternating it so that we deliver the special schedule at the elementary school, so there's curricular impact there in the shifts. But just to step back and you think about our RTI, AIS requirements, and then IEP, all of a sudden you alter it and you're going to be confusing parents and kids and schedule all over the place. And I really worry about a lot of complaints in and around compliance and delivering the required services, that if all of a sudden now a Tuesday is a Monday, but on a Tuesday a kid normally gets a required counseling service, but they're not going to get it, we're going to have parents that are going to be calling, and it's a very, as Scott said before, a very litigious situation.
So
It gets
just to
muddy.
be clear though, because to me this, not to kind of belabor the point, but these dates that look somewhat random to us are not random in terms of the way the schedule works.
I think when we sit down and do calendar, we are highly cognizant of trying to spread things out. We do look at parent-teacher conference. We look at all those different days. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Phil.
just actually.
No.
So the point being that when we have a superintendent's conference day on Thursday the 3rd instead of Friday the 4th, that has, you actually chose that day for a specific reason. And so if you then were to change it to the 4th because the board wants everyone to have a long weekend, that would have an impact on the schedule that you've already, that's the problem, I think, just to be clear. And so we can say we want them to go back and look at that because we don't have a majority of votes to approve it, if that's what you want. I just want to move this along because I don't know.
I'm inclined to just support this and
Thank you.
that I think there isn't obviously, this has been circulating in the community, there isn't an outcry. Obviously, the administration feels strongly this is what they want to do, and I don't think there's, enough.
Right. I mean, my request was going to be that you continue to sort of look at this because we do have some community members who are not happy with this, and, you can't make all the people happy all the time, but the logic of...
Without putting something in the water.
The logic of looking at...
That's a plan.
Looking at a Friday instead of Thursday makes sense in a vacuum. We're not going to ask you to do that now, but for next year, if you can continue to...
We're always looking at it,
Yeah.
So,
All right?
noted.
I would just say I'm far more, now I understand in a way that I can support the calendar. I didn't really understand previous to this extension of the
Okay.
discussion.
So, all in favor of approving this calendar as amended with the 16th as a half-day? Aye?
Aye.
Okay. All right, on to the adoption of the shared decision-making plan. We'll move this so we can talk about it. Can I have a motion to accept this for discussion here?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, any discussion on this item? Did everybody look at it?
I don't know where you're going to go, but I would just love a walkthrough of the process.
Yeah, so when we identified last year that there were, that we had not been compliant with a Commissioner Regulation 100.11, that we went back and reviewed that and looked for the history of it, and quite honestly, it hadn't been updated in a number of years. Interestingly enough, we reached out to many of our surrounding districts and asking, hey, when was the last time you're doing it, with what frequency? Now, the Commissioner's Regulation says every 2 years you're supposed to do it, and the vast majority of school districts responded to Elaine on her district clerk listserv that, what is the shared decision-making plan, or that we haven't done that forever, and people had, a couple of our neighboring districts that I won't publicly identify and haven't readopted it since 1994 when it was implemented and things along those lines. But in the spirit of the regulation, we decided that it was necessary to go back and revisit the plan. So we put together a representative community as spelled out by the actual regulation itself, which calls for members of the bargaining units to nominate people to be on it, as well as members of the PTSA. So we had representatives from IAA, IFA, and PTSA that sat on a committee. We met two occasions, went through many iterations, and of course, as you can imagine, edits offline as well. And quite honestly, the committee looked at the old iteration of the plan, and it was just a little convoluted and hard to follow. And in doing so, we talked with our attorneys that identified the required components, which are all the subtitles throughout the plan, and identified those as the areas we needed to address. So working in those parameters, the committee literally took what was there and streamlined the whole thing into a document that is much more legible. It flows nicely, and it makes a lot more sense to us. Everybody was happy with this iteration. The only adjustments I think we'd make before actually going and publishing this with your approval tonight is some formatting changes, and we want to acknowledge the committee that did the work on it.
Found a small typo in there, but.
Yeah, there was a typo.
Yeah.
Where was the typo?
If you could have seen the red line version, it would be easy to see how
Yeah, I
one
saw a
typo
typo. I don't know
escaped
if you
us.
guys saw the same typo.
So if you see the typo, point it, let me know. We'll make the fix. And
As is role of local decision-making, the fourth line. The success of its students as is role.
Yes, its role. Yeah, also, right, there's that.
oh, that was corrected once. That stands out. Good.
There's also a wording mistake, I believe, in the second sentence. The word is should be are. Students and their growth are at the core. Not students and it is, okay.
Okay.
Typo with a T.
Typo with a T.
You can just let me know.
Yeah.
Well, that was typo with a T. There should be a is should be its. The missing T there.
Okay, so can we approve this? Any other discussion? We approve this with typos corrected?
Well, I have a concern about this, my concern about this document is, maybe it complies with the letter of the law, but I went back and looked at the regulation. And the top of the regulation says purpose, the purpose of school-based planning and shared decision-making shall be to improve the educational performance of all students in school, and then it goes on to say regardless of such factors as socioeconomic status, race, sex, language, background, or disability. But I don't really read this as focused on improving the educational performance of our students. It's kind of peripheral stuff again. And so that's my concern about this. It's, student wellness, for example, reports. You know, it doesn't seem like it's focused on education, the core educational things again. And kind of getting back to this, you know, can we focus more on core education, I guess? And this is another area we're not seeing it.
John, I don't think this is something that's saying that anything is precluded from it. We're looking at this as a document that helps kind of guide the work that happens at each site committee. So there's nothing that precludes that from it. So when we look at a cross-section of the school community that worked on this, there was rich dialogue that happened in those committee meetings that spoke about the types of work that goes on in the committee, what's appropriate for the work that does go in the committee, and it touched on so many items. What the committee felt strongly was that we shouldn't be stepping back and limiting it to a list of examples that would confine the work. The categories that you see as far as wellness and programs and sports, those are all categories that pre-existed, that have been in the district's plan since it was created. They just streamlined the way in which it was spelled out.
Is it possible we could just simply add some more examples that would make this?
It would be contrary to the work that the committee did, because the committee.
But I think what John is saying is that the regulation is around education, so.
Yeah, and
So the committee is, you know, in contrary to the regulation.
Well, they're just examples anyway, right? It says example project, right? That's what John's referring to, I think.
well, I'm looking at I don't know, that was an overall statement that I'm not particularly comfortable with the document as it's written for that reason.
Well,
I mean, one opportunity I see from looking at this, and it maybe is a bridge between what we're seeing here and what your suggestion is, that as we go through the strategic planning process, I love the composition is somewhat reflective of what we're doing with strategic planning, and that, you know, as we come out of that process, there may be some alignment using these site committees to help us ensure we're moving forward on some of those goals.
Well, maybe we should
That may be a reference
defer
point.
this, maybe we should defer this until we get the output of the strategic planning, and then.
I don't know that we're limited to.
I would say the opposite, John, that I would recommend that you adopt this, and then it's something that can be revised to reflect and align with that document and plan. Because I think if this is an effort of compliance to ensure that we're compliant with the state regulation, let's be compliant with the regulation, and then adjust the plan as necessary down the road. There's nothing to preclude us from revising the plan at a later date.
I would say there's nothing that holds us from circling back to this later, if we vote now.
I guess where I come out on this is I would look at this not so much as hopefully as a compliance exercise, as a way for us to, you know, improve what we're doing.
You're in favor of tabling it?
I think so. I think we should probably.
Right, so we have two people that are not going to support this.
You know, and I want to push back on that a little bit, because we're tabling it without direction. So I don't know where to go, and that there's a committee of people that worked on this, and that you know, we're looking at the practical work of a school site committee and a group of parents that come together once a month to meet with the principal, and they're identifying particular projects and initiatives that they focus on, and this is a document to guide that work. It's growing out of legislation that was enacted out of an old school reform initiative going back in the 90s that's no longer alive.
But we just don't have a quorum here.
And my guidance would be that I would.
Just wait until the 22nd. All right?
Okay, so you're going to defer this till you get your 3 votes. Okay, fine.
But Chris, I think the feedback is valid in that it doesn't really show that the emphasis and the focus of the committee should be on improving the education in the schools. It does feel a little squishy, like too many things, including, as Michael noted, their strategic plan.
Yeah, and I think I would really like to see it. I won't be here on the 22nd, and if Bob is here, this I don't know what Michael's and your view is, but it will probably pass as it's written. And that's fine, but I just want to, my view is I think that we need better systems for incorporating the views and concerns of parents into the educational process, representative parents into the educational core educational processes of the district, and this is a device that appears to be set up to do that, and I don't think we're taking advantage of that in the way the document is written. We're kind of.
Do you want, but, I mean, the problem, John, is that the committee, the
So
site
that's my
committee.
guidance. They could go back to the committee if you want, but, yeah.
Right, the site committee worked on this, and I guess, you know, it's unfortunate that it wasn't sort of part of the policy committee, in which case it would have been reviewed. by
It
the
did go to the policy.
Oh.
Okay, well, this is my opportunity for feedback, and I'm giving you my feedback.
Right.
All right, so let's table it and move along with the
Okay.
agenda then, please.
So, do I need to formally table this, right? Can I have a motion to table,
You might not get a success on that
You
either.
might not succeed, right.
So just,
Yeah, a motion to table it.
it's just tabling it.
Okay,
so
well,
just a second though, because it does state in student achievement experiences may be measured by a variety of means, including but not limited to assessment, participation, so it does include education in this, and looking at
yeah, well, that's kind of because it's
education as part of the student experience.
legally required to do that, I think.
So you're saying,
It's-
so you're splitting hairs?
I think it's kind of, it's dotting its i's and crossing its t's, but I don't really think it's getting at the spirit of what I would like to see site committees do.
So what is exactly the spirit of the site
It's
committee?
to focus on educational matters as opposed to such things as student wellness and et cetera.
But would you say the site committee should exclude those things?
No, but I think they.
So it's the
shouldn't be
emphasis of this document that.
Yeah, the emphasis is sort of, let's give these people something to do, but, we don't really want, we really don't want serious involvement.
And you're getting that
Let's
from
not
the-
undermine the work that's happened.
You're getting that from the categories here, the
I'm-
student programs,
it's-
student wellness, community relations, and facilities, and that's it?
Yeah, I guess.
So if we were to add one section that's specifically focused on education,
We either move it or we don't.
Yeah, I know, that's.
How many,
I
there
think
were
we're
how many- there
talking
were
about
parents
tabling.
on this
If you don't want
committee?
to-
We had parents
Right?
on this committee that were, and I have to tell you, they weren't the typical parents. To say that there's been insinuations in the past about people being placed on the committee. So, we had Anita Marshall was on the committee, who is not a regular voice, who happens, interestingly, happened to have overlap with strategic planning. Sherry Wells was on the committee. Come on.
Who else?
High school parent, site committee member. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank.
Chris,
Yeah.
but let's just,
So,
Let's move on.
yeah, so
If you're going to pass it on,
I just need to know whether I should table it or not, because we don't have.
I would support
votes.
tabling it.
Okay, so.
well, look, it's just gonna pass in 2 weeks, so let's just pass and get it over with and move on.
Okay, so let's at least put it to the vote. So, right now, I'm going to ask if we accept if you are in favor of the adoption of the shared decision-making plan, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. If you're not in favor, please say nay.
Nay.
Okay. So it passes 3-1.
consent agenda.
Now we're on to the consent agenda. Yeah.
What about the intermunicipal agreement?
But that's a consent agenda, isn't it?
It doesn't say consent on it.
What's that?
Just look at hang on, just look at the resolution.
What's that?
7.3
7.3
is
is in the consent
a
agenda.
consent. It didn't pop up.
Okay.
Yeah, but it is consent.
Okay, just didn't want
Okay.
Yeah, so just the verbiage, the label, but it's, by resolution, it's fine.
Okay. Oh, down in here, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see. All right, so our consent agenda includes 7.3 through 7.6, all of 8, all of 9, and 10. Right. So can I have a motion to accept the consent agenda for discussion?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, so now we can discuss any one of these items. 7.3, did everyone have a chance to read that? If they found this acceptable?
Yeah, we were given this a few weeks ago, I think. right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not different from what we were given. is it?
Only that it was approved by the village already.
Yeah, but the village already approved it, so hopefully that's acceptable. What?
The consent agenda should have a 9:10. It
I
should
said,
be-
I said 9.
No, 9:10?
I said all of 9.
Okay,
Yeah, and all of 10.
okay.
I think there's a 10, yes. Anything, are the minutes okay, John?
Am I the only one who reads minutes?
I don't.
You don't?
Nor do I.
And you guys approve these minutes without reading them?
I'm guilty as charged.
Now, I don't know if that's right.
We can, we can.
It's faith in
You
Elaine.
could put, you know.
I should have, you're right, I should be
You could
abstaining.
put some sort of, foreign language in there, and nobody would ever notice. But,
John, because you're reading them, I feel good about the.
yeah, I think,
You're like a
It's
committee,
divide
you're
and
in a
conquer.
meeting minutes committee.
well, I think that's kind of a free rider issue, but,
So-
it's not how
So
board
you-
is. So anyway, on the minutes, as you might, I have 2 points. General comment is it possible to prioritize getting us the minutes, so at least those of us who read the minutes can read them relatively soon after the meetings? Because my memory, maybe I was the only one, maybe memory singular fades. So it'd be nice to have the minute for approval of the following meeting, generally, if we can do it.
I can try.
Yeah.
Yeah, Elaine works as fast as she can.
We actually approve them once a month on the regular agenda. It should be done 2 weeks after the meeting. I was keeping up, and now I'm sort of.
Yeah, once
still working on the 23rd.
Yeah, once you get in the behind, it's hard to catch up, because it's extra.
So I'm almost there with the 23rd, and.
Okay.
So.
Maybe just a little email when it is done.
Well, I can just email them to you, because I do them in Word. and
Yeah.
I can just send them.
An email, might as well copy the rest of the board,
Oh,
they might
yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
interested.
Oh, no, I wouldn't just send them.
But, so on 7.6, I didn't read these all, but I did read the parts with my name on them and what I supposedly said. And I didn't say what it has me saying, so I would think if we could table the January 26th minutes, it's, yeah, I will, find it.
Well, call me tomorrow, and we can talk.
Well, yeah, I'm tired, so it's hard to find it. Oh, yeah, this is toward the end of the minutes. Mr. Montgomery noted that through last year's budget, staff was added at core academics and is not seeing resources devoted to core academics. Again, that's just not right,
No, it should
yeah.
have been not devoted to core academics, okay.
Not added at core academics.
Can we just make an edit to that, John?
It's not, yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
all
that would
that
do it,
sounds,
yeah,
yeah.
okay. Then if we make that edit, put a not in there.
Okay.
I would support it,
Got it?
okay? And, the other things that supposedly other people said, well, they'll just go down in history.
Okay, and presumably nothing under 8.
I have nothing else for the record.
Okay.
We'll just move.
Michael? Catherine?
Nothing.
Might slightly differ with the narrative, but I'll move on.
Okay, so I'll put this to a vote then, if our discussion is done. All in favor of the consent agenda as amended, 7.6, right, Elaine? That's how it's said. All in favor, please?
Aye.
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 Michael?
He said
I said aye.
I didn't hear you.
Very, very small,
Yeah.
mouse-like
Okay.
aye.
I know it when I get it in stereo.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
So it passes.
Can I just ask for maybe a motion on the shared decision-making?
It might have been me.
It was,
Yeah, it was you.
Yeah, it was you.
And Michael seconded.
Yeah. All right,
while
so
ago.
we are done. Our next meeting is March 22nd, 7:30. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Can I, just one last,
All right.
We have an executive
Yeah.
session
Yeah, oh, I forgot about the
on
meeting
Thursday, the 10th, 7 PM,
Yeah.
District
I just had one question for Raina.
purposes of
Or
negotiations.
Dr. Harrison or Dr. Core. Is the, are there additional leave replacements that we're doing, or?
For this coming year?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
it.
middle school,
Yeah.
not
okay.
elementary,
Can I have a motion?
that we
to-
know.
Thank you.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
No, I want to be here all night.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Don't forget the plaque over there.
Yeah, thank you.